Good afternoon, and I would like to welcome you here on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, Highland, Park-Highwood, and Deerfield, as well as the Union League Club of Chicago, and of course, Patch. I'm Steve Sadin. I'm the editor of the Deerfield Patch. We are a network of more than 850 news sites owned by AOL. We have sites in most of the northern suburbs. 13 sites, as a matter of fact, in the 10th Congressional District, probably in your town. Please like us on Facebook, sign up for our newsletter, and most important, read our coverage, read the coverage in the Tribune and the Daily Herald that the Medill News Service put out. They're all here covering the event today. And between October 22nd and November 6th, please vote for the person who's going to represent your values best. It is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Public Affairs Committee of the Union League Club of Chicago and my fraternity brother and roommate from just a few years ago at the University of Missouri, Bob Kreisman.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all very much. The Union League Club of Chicago and its Public Affairs Committee are proud to join forces today with the League of Women Voters and Patch to co-sponsor today's very important candidate forum. The Union League Club of Chicago is the only private club in the nation with an institutional commitment to public policy advocacy and community service. Since its founding in 1879, the Union League Club has been at the forefront of civic affairs and shares with the League of Women Voters a commitment to promoting good government and citizen involvement. Today's forum is in keeping with that tradition, and we're delighted to be a part of it. We welcome you today. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and former President of the League of Women Voters, Jan Flappen.
Thank you and welcome. I want to thank Patch, the Union League of Chicago, and the 3 League of Women Voters chapters, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff area, Highland, Park-Highwood, and Deerfield. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League never supports or opposes political candidates or political parties. Both women and men of all ages are welcome as members. The League is sponsoring 2 other events which I want to note. Another candidate debate for the Lake County administrative positions, coroner, circuit court clerk, recorder, and state's attorney, will be next Sunday, October 21st at 1:30 at the Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Senior Center. On November 1st at 7 o'clock, a program about solutions to the Illinois public pension problems will be at Gordon Community Center in Lake Forest. For more information, please visit the League websites, and they're listed in the program, or see the brochures at the sign-in table just outside the auditorium doors. And there are also voters' guides on the League websites. The League asked me to give a special thank you to Lake Forest High School, and especially Kathy O'Hara and Ben Davidson. Now I'd like to review the rules for the debate, and much of this is more detailed in the program. First, please turn off all cell phones and electronic devices. Campaign materials such as hats, buttons, t-shirts, signs are not permitted in the auditorium. I ask you to hold your applause until the end. Please be respectful, and remember any noise that you make will take away from the time the candidates have to respond. These debates are being taped by Lake Forest TV, and unauthorized videos are not allowed. Each candidate signed an agreement that forbids the editing or use of footage for campaign advertising. Each candidate has a minute and a half for both the opening and closing statements, and 1 minute to answer each question. Audience members may submit and have submitted already questions provided by the ushers. And the cards can be collected now. If you hold up your hand with the card, ushers will come through and collect more, or you can get another card. League members will review the questions to eliminate duplication or combine similar questions. Due to time limits, I hope you understand not all questions may be asked. Candidate statements will be timed. The league members who are keeping time are in the front, and they will display countdown cards available to the candidates and me. And can you hold up your cards so we can see them? Okay, so it's 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and stop. So you can both see those, right?
We can.
Okay.
Be a problem if we couldn't.
And if the candidates agree, I can shorten or lengthen candidate response times uniformly. I can also adjust the scheduled time slot for the debate if all questions are answered before the time period ends. I don't think that's going to happen. Exchanges between candidates will be ruled out of order and no visual aids are permitted. Now I'd like to introduce our candidates. On my immediate left we have Robert Dold, Congressman, and he is the Republican candidate, and Brad Schneider is the Democratic candidate, and they are running for the 10th Congressional District. The candidates participated in a coin toss, and the winner who decided to go first is Congressman Dold.
Well, thank you so much, and I want to thank Lake Forest and League of Women Voters for their help in putting this together. When I decided to run for Congress as a small business owner, it was because I felt Washington was making it harder and harder for me to put the key in the door and open up my business each and every day. Frankly, it should be quite the opposite. They should be making it easier for me to open up my business, easier for me to employ that next individual. That and the idea of the amount of money that was being spent. And both the Republicans and the Democrats were overspending, truly jeopardizing the American dream for my children and yours. I've set forth a clear vision in my Main Street Jobs agenda, enabling us to be able to work together, to be able to put our economy back on track and get more people back to work. Worked hard to try to make sure that we're getting more loans out to small businesses. Worked across the aisle to try to make sure we're creating an environment where more people are going back to work. I've worked hard and I'm proud to stand up for women's health. I've worked hard in terms of trying to make sure that we're protecting clean air and clean water and the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes. I fought for mass transit, even against my own party, in order to try to make sure that we have those funding dollars here. I also have worked with the administration to try to make sure that we're ending corruption for felons like Governor Rod Blagojevich so that they don't receive a taxpayer-funded pension. And I also have worked with those on the other side of the aisle to make sure that we've got sanctions for Iran. I'm proud to be rated as one of the most independent bipartisan members in the United States Congress, and I'm pleased to have received the endorsement of the Chicago Tribune and Daily Herald this week. We have thoughtful, independent leadership in the 10th District, and we'll continue to do so with my leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider.
Thank you. 4 years ago, this time we remembered that the economy was in free fall. Lehman had failed. We were all scared. Everyone was worried about their future. Today we've made progress, but there's still a long way still to go. Here in Illinois, families continue to struggle. Skilled workers still have a hard time finding jobs. For too many families, college education is further and further out of reach. It's hard to save. It's even harder to retire. And yet in Washington, we see a Tea Party-controlled Congress that continues to put ideology and screaming ahead of tackling the real challenges we face. I'm in this race because for the first time, the promise to our children and their generation that their future will be brighter than what our parents left to us is in doubt. If it weren't so important, we could let the politicians in Washington fight it out while we focus about our business here at home. But it is critically important, and the critical work that needs to get done isn't getting done in Washington. We need to change the way business is done. I've spent my career working with businesses, some large, but mostly small and medium-sized family businesses. I understand why simplifying our tax code is so important. I know that we need to give confidence in the future so business owners can invest in innovation, hire new people, and get this economy growing again. I know that we have to do a different way in Washington. We need to change the way things are done, and I'm committed to do just that.
The first question will go to Mr. Dold. What is your viewpoint on current immigration policy?
I think that as we look at immigration policy, we talk oftentimes about comprehensive immigration reform, which oftentimes gives people an opportunity to vote against comprehensive immigration reform. I have said all along that I think that the DREAM Act, which has gotten so much attention as of late, is a step in the right direction. Generally in our country, we judge people on their merits, as opposed to something that their father or mother has done. People that know no other country besides the United States, I do think that there's an opportunity for us to give them a way to serve our country and be able to stay here in the United States. I've also offered legislation with regard to immigration, and this will help with jobs. When we have people that come over, we educate the best and the brightest from all over the world. And then when they graduate with an advanced degree in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what do? We send them home to compete against us, when what we want to do is say, we'd like you to stay here, innovate here, create American jobs here. So I do think that there's a lot of work that can be done, and I'm pleased to have been a bipartisan co-sponsor of legislation to keep them here.
We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to bring the 11 million people here out of the shadows who are contributing to the economy and allow them to do it in a way that provides for their family and helps our communities. We need to give them a pathway to citizenship that doesn't prejudice the people who have waited patiently at the borders. We need to make sure we secure our borders. I stand with the President in fighting for the DREAM Act. I agree with Mr. Dold. It is a shame to waste the resources and innovation and creative capacities of young people who come here as young children, go to our schools, have the potential to contribute to our communities, and yet we don't give them the resources to go get the education they need to do just that. It is a shame that we take engineers who graduate from foreign countries and send them away rather than giving the opportunity to innovate here, make things here, and ship it around the world. So we need to reform our immigration policy.
Okay, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Schneider, for the next question, and then we'll just alternate after that.
Sounds good.
Do you support drilling in Lake Michigan?
I do not support drilling in Lake Michigan under any circumstances whatsoever. Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes account for 20% of the fresh water on this earth. 30 million people in this country rely on the Great Lakes for their fresh water. We cannot allow drilling in Lake Michigan under any circumstances, under any conditions. Unfortunately, my opponent did vote to allow drilling in Lake Michigan. This is something that I would not have done. We need to make sure that Lake Michigan is preserved. We need to make sure that our environment is protected. This Congress has voted over 300 times against the environment. They argue that we need to make a choice between protecting our environment and providing a legacy to our children and creating jobs. But the fact of the matter is, by investing in alternative energies, investing in conservation, we can create the jobs we need and we can lead the world in a critical area of addressing our environmental concerns.
I think it's preposterous to think that I want to drill in Lake Michigan. As an Eagle Scout and a Scoutmaster, first of all, let me just say, 2005 Energy Policy Act, it is illegal today to drill in Lake Michigan and will remain to be illegal as long as I am your congressman. The first bill that I introduced was the Great Lakes Water Protection Act, a bipartisan bill with Congressman Dan Lipinski, Senator Durbin, and Senator Kirk. I voted to increase GLRI funding, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I've been awarded the Congressional Outdoor Champion 2 years in a row. That's by Wilderness Society, the Outdoor Alliance for Kids, Conservation Lands Foundation, the National Wildlife-Based Foundation, and the Sierra Club. Actually, I got a letter, and this was after the bill that he's talking about, from the Sierra Club. Many of you may have received it as well. It was sent out on Saturday, the 25th of February, from Ann Messenkoff that said, last week the House of Representatives passed the 2012 Big Oil Wish List. It opens up drilling off our coast and public on pristine lands in the Arctic National Wildlife, but your Representative Bob Dold stood firm against Big Oil's pressure and voted no on the worst environmental bill of the year. Call and thank him.
Thank you. You're taking time away. Thank you. You're taking time away from the debate by doing that. We're going to switch to foreign policy for a couple of questions. Mr. Schneider, do you agree that making Israel a partisan issue is bad for the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Israel is the only issue, or one of the few issues, where we see in Congress true collaboration and bipartisanship. The U.S. Senate can vote 100-0 in favor of support for Israel's security and the special relationship, the unbreakable bond between our country and Israel. Israel's security is in our national interest in a very dangerous region. Part of the success of the relationship with the United States and Israel is because of that bipartisanship. To attack me, as some have, to say anything other than I am a lifelong defender of the U.S.-Israel relationship, an inaugural member of the AIPAC New Leadership Network, involved in AIPAC since college, a member of the new AIPAC Congressional Club, recognizing all of the work I have done in Congress, is, to borrow a word, preposterous. We need to preserve the relationship between the United States and Israel. We need to do it in a way that is bipartisan. To do it any other way is bad for Israel, it's bad for the United States, and it's bad for our community.
Let me say that I think that the U.S.-Israel relationship, the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship rests with the Congress. There's no question, this is not left versus right, it's right versus wrong. And let me just say that my commitment to the people of the 10th District was that I would not be just a vote, I would be a voice. I have a record of leadership, trying to make sure that we're preserving and protecting the U.S.-Israel relationship, that it's strong, that the world knows that the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder with our one true ally. Where the difference may lie is in just diplomacy. And frankly, there are those organizations and groups out there that are advocating that we not have all options on the table. I think we have to have a credible military threat because the region of the world that we're talking about with Iran responds to strength and strength alone. Organizations like J Street has said, do not put military options on the table, which frankly I think is an important part of our diplomacy. My opponent has said that he supports J Street, and that's fine. But it does highlight a difference between our diplomacy and what will happen, I think, in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, audience, please, I ask you not to applaud. Congressman Dold, what do you think of the way our president handled the Libyan crisis and what should have been done?
Let me just say, I think that the Libyan crisis in Benghazi, where we had an ambassador that was assassinated and 3 other Americans were killed, is a tragedy. Around September 11th, obviously we should all be on high alert. This has now been determined as a coordinated attack at at least 24 outposts of the United States around the world. I do think, at least the initial thought was in a terrorist attack from my initial reaction. That was not what came out of the administration. But I don't want to point fingers. What I do think is alarming and concerning is the fact that it's now become, more light has been shed on the idea that Ambassador Stevens did request additional assistance, additional security forces, and especially around September 11th. That should be something that we ought to honor.
Same question.
Thank you. The tragedy in Libya, the death of one of our best diplomats, reflects the difficulties and challenges we face in this region. But I want to take my hat off to President Obama for going after Osama bin Laden and showing the world, let me finish, showing the world that the clock doesn't start on day 1 and we forget about justice. We will pursue justice to all ends of the earth. What happened to Ambassador Stevens was a crime. And you will see this country, regardless of who's president, go after and pursue justice and make sure it's delivered. But let me touch on another thing. My opponent is trying to mislead you. What I said about J Street is that I support J Street and AIPAC's right to communicate their vision and to be heard. But I come from AIPAC. I've been involved in AIPAC for over 30 years. What my opponent said about funding the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, he voted to cut it in half.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Now both sides have been applauding. Can we have a little quiet now? We're going to stick with Foreign policy for one more question, and I will start with Mr. Schneider. Should the playing field be leveled between the U.S. and China?
The playing field has to be leveled between the United States and China, between the United States and all of the countries in which we do business, with which we do business. We are in a global economy. There is no doubt about that, and our future depends upon it. We are 5% of the world's population. If we can invent things here, make them here, and ship them to the rest of the world, that's how we'll create the jobs here. But when we negotiate trade agreements, we need to make sure that we do it in a way that creates a level playing field, in a way that allows our companies to compete anywhere in the world. President Obama set out a goal to double exports over 5 years. We are ahead of that schedule. We need to do it over and over again. We need to invest in manufacturing in this country to bring jobs here. We have the most productive workforce, but we can't continue to have that workforce if we don't educate our young people to have the skills they need to compete in the 21st century economy. We can compete with any country in the world, but we can only do it if we recognize that we have to do it on a level playing field.
When we look at a level playing field, there's no question, and certainly as we look at manufacturing, I talk to manufacturers each and every day, right here in our district. Why manufacturing is so important is because we actually live in the second largest manufacturing district in the nation. 620 manufacturers representing over 93,000 jobs. When I talk to manufacturers, many of them say, I can't compete because they're getting subsidized in China. They're in essence dumping here into the United States. So I do think that we have to hold China accountable on letting their currency float. I also think that another big issue is talking about patent protections, which is so very, very important. And that's a problem over in China, and cybersecurity, which China has been notoriously awful with in terms of pirating our networks here. The greatest wealth transfer has already happened, and it's done through the internet and it's done through cybersecurity, an issue that we have to take very seriously in order to level the playing field.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to taxes. I have a lot of questions on taxes, and start with Congressman Dold. Name one of the top 10 deductions you would repeal to partially fund Romney's 20% tax cut.
I'm not sure I know about the 20% tax cut, but let me just simply say, as we talk about comprehensive tax reform, I do think that we have to eliminate the lobbyist loopholes that are out there. That in essence we've got to take, whether it be big oil or it be something else, eliminate the lobbyist loopholes. It's the worst type of crony capitalism we have. We have to lower those rates so that we can be more globally competitive. So people say, look, we have the highest corporate tax in the world, and we do. And I talk to businesses that are telling me, you know what, we're losing business to Canada, which by the way dropped their corporate rate to 15%. I do think we have to talk about how do we make ourselves more competitive. And I think that the way we do so is to try to eliminate those lobbyist loopholes so we can lower the rate and make our small businesses more competitive as well.
We need comprehensive tax reform. But we need to do it in a way different what we're seeing from the other side. My opponents voted not once but twice for a Ryan plan, a plan that would take Medicare and turn it into a voucher program, a plan that gives millionaires an average of $250,000 of tax breaks, yet raises taxes on middle class by an average of $1,300. That's not the tax reform we need. We need to make sure that we can bring our budget in balance. Our expenditures are at 25%, our revenues are at 14.5%, the lowest they've ever been in our history. We need to bring the lines back together. In 1999, our last balanced budget, they touched 19% of GDP. Right? My opponent signed a Grover Norquist tax pledge, saying he would never raise taxes, never close a loophole, never eliminate a deduction. That eliminates the chance for comprehensive tax reform. But if we don't get comprehensive tax reform, if we don't bring our budget more into balance, we threaten our long-term economic future, and we threaten our kids' future as well.
Thank you. Along with that, please describe 3 specific ideas to modify and improve the tax code. Mr. Schneider.
There is no doubt that our tax code is overcomplicated. Small businesses do struggle with contradictory rules and regulations. We need, again, comprehensive tax reform to simplify the tax code, to make deductions more in line with the needs we have today. We continue to give oil subsidies to the biggest oil companies, our tax subsidies to the biggest oil companies. We need to stop doing that. We can continue to give tax breaks for companies that move jobs overseas. We need to eliminate that. We need to give tax breaks to companies that are going to invest in people, bring them off the unemployment rolls and put them on the payroll. Take them from the skills they had for 20th century jobs and teach them the skills they need for 21st century jobs. If we can do that, if we can get small companies hiring again, we can get the job growth we need again.
Well, I don't think we're going to get small companies hiring again if we decide we're just going to tax them more. If the government's going to come in and take more from them, I don't think that's what's going to get small businesses hiring. We have 29 million small businesses in our country. If we can create an environment that enables them to have more certainty and confidence to invest in their business and grow by a single job, that ought to be what we focus on. Now, Brad just talked a little bit about trying to sign a pledge not to raise taxes. And I'll tell you, I don't believe that raising taxes is the answer. But when I went to Washington, things were worse than I even anticipated. And so when it came time for Republicans and Democrats to offer the first bipartisan budget in a generation, there were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats that stuck their neck out to say, we'll do it. I was one of them. Because frankly, the future of the country is far too important. Putting revenues and spending cuts on the table is important. So based upon the Simpson-Bowles framework, the President's Bipartisan Deficit Reduction Commission, it was the Cooper-Latourette budget. Unfortunately, there were only 38 votes, but it's the right way to go.
All right, we'll continue with Simpson-Bowles. If it was put to an up or down vote, would you support it? Why or why not? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Well, based upon the answer I gave just a moment ago, I would say yes, and here's why it's important. Running a small business, one of the things that I certainly understand is that when there's a problem in the business, what I'm looking to do is gather the people around the table that know most about the problem and have them come up with a solution to that problem. It's going to be best for my customers and for my business. Same thing's true in Washington. We can't just think it's going to be just an ideological one way or the other. Coming together, it's going to have to be Republicans and Democrats sitting together and finding a solution. During the super committee's debate, 100 of us went and signed a letter to those that joint select committee saying put everything on the table. The bipartisan budget that came to the floor, only 38 of us actually voted for that budget. But I do believe that as the fiscal cliff is coming, that's going to be the way that we get out of this mess. It's going to be Republicans and Democrats putting patriotism first and solving the problem.
Thank you.
First of all, Cooper-Latourette is not Simpson-Bowles. It was a plan that was put 2 days before the vote for the Ryan budget. It had $1 trillion less of revenue than Simpson-Bowles had put on the table. It gave more tax cuts than Simpson-Bowles had intended. It was not Simpson-Bowles. But 2 days later, the Congress did vote for the Ryan plan, including Mr. Dold, in a very partisan vote, a plan that would put more burden on working families while continuing to give tax breaks to those who need them the least. I know in Congress we are going to have to come together. I know we're going to have to work to find spending cuts and find revenue increases. That's what's going to be on the table. We have to do it in a bipartisan way. We have to do it in a way that everyone understands the choices we make are the right choices for the future of this country, and we can explain it in a way that will get more than 38 votes. I'm committed to going to Washington to do that. I don't know if it will be based on Simpson-Bowles, on Riflin, Domenici. It will be based on compromise, and I will vote for it when it comes to the floor.
Let's stick with the spending cuts. Mr. Schneider, give details of specific spending cuts you would support.
So as we look at this budget, spending 25% of our GDP, we can't sustain that. The President has already talked about some of the cuts, very different than sequestration, which would be across the board and in places we don't entirely want it. We need to look at defense. We need to look at a defense that stops spending money on weapon systems made for 20th century threats and puts the money into defense systems and diplomacy for 21st century threats. We need to look at the expenditures we're making on tax subsidies, subsidies that may have made sense in the 1930s but don't make sense today. And we need to look at the programs we have where we're investing throughout the country every one of those investments, if it's not a positive return, if it doesn't provide more in return than what we're spending on it, it has to be on the table. We have to say, we can't do everything. Okay? What I said before, we need a bipartisan approach, sitting down at the table, working together, and finding cuts where we can.
When we talk about Simpson Bowls, we were before the Chicago Tribune at an editorial board when my opponent said he wouldn't support Simpson Bowls. And, you know, listen, I think this is going to be incumbent upon us as we look at spending cuts out there. There are going to be things that we have to cut that we don't want to. I've said that we ought to be looking at the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture first, because those are traditionally programs that the Republicans hold dear. We're cutting $478 billion out of the Department of Defense. Earlier this year, I led the charge to help get rid of wasteful spending out of the Department of Defense. I worked with Congressman Quigley to do the same on some naval vessels. We're going to continue to do that, but as we look at the broader framework, we have to be talking about zero-based budgeting. Not just an automatic increase that's going to happen. We have to say we have to have each department go through and justify why they want their increase and why they deserve it.
Thank you. This is a question that someone posed as a personal problem. I have been manufacturing in India for some 15 years. I am now considering bringing manufacturing back to the state, Illinois. What will you do to improve my business, tax, and health care worries so I can justify returning to the states? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Reshoring, I'm delighted to hear that they're considering reshoring jobs. I've visited manufacturers that are trying to do exactly the same thing. As we look at the region and our community, and you close your eyes for just a moment and just imagine if you're a business, where would you want to set up shop? First, you want to make sure you've got a great place to raise a family, our openlands, our wetlands, the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes. We've got great educational institutions around, a great research and development corridor, so top quality talent that's here. Think about it, Abbott, Baxter, Takeda, Astellas, Dow, Cardinal. So we have a great amount of pool to be able to pull folks in terms of attracting businesses. We've got great transportation infrastructure, which is really a great thing in terms of how we attract additional business. The problem is that we don't have a business-friendly environment in the state of Illinois. We decided to raise taxes 66% on individuals, 48% on businesses, and literally the next day, Wisconsin put the open for business signs up. People were fleeing to Indiana, Wisconsin, and other states. We need to turn that around, bring those businesses right back here to our country, and specifically to the 10th District.
When I graduated with an engineering degree in 1983, more than 20% of the work in this country, of the economy, was manufacturing. Today, that's down to 11%. We need to bring manufacturing back, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure, we have the workers, and we have the tax structure that allows those companies to succeed. Right? To fail to invest in our infrastructure, China is investing 9% of their GDP in infrastructure. In Europe, the number is 5%, and yet here at home, we're 2.5%, and they want to cut it even further. We have half of our students dropping out of school before high school graduation. We can't compete in a global economy if these kids don't have the skills to fill these manufacturing jobs. And we need to make sure that we give those companies the opportunity, incentives to bring jobs back to the United States rather than to ship them overseas. And when they get them here, incentives to invest in people and give them the skills they need. That's how we get companies to come back and manufacture in the United States.
We're going to the global economy. As the European economies continue to struggle, would you favor bailouts to ensure that the world economy does not collapse? And we'll start with you, Mr. Schneider.
We are in a global economy. We've seen time and again over the last couple of decades, when there are problems in the world, it affects our economy here. If we want to export to foreign markets, we need foreign markets to have the opportunity to buy our products. But we need to look to foreign markets. We need to look to the European Union. We need to look to Asia to manage their own economies and do it in a way that doesn't involve false manipulation of currencies, doesn't involve in creating unfair advantages. As we work in the global economy and we lead from a position of strength, we lead from having our budgets in balance, we lead from having the best innovation and the best products, we can help those other economies. It really is, in a global economy, an opportunity for a rising tide to raise all ships. As the economy grows, as people in other countries become middle class, it's not a zero-sum game, but it's an expanding pie. And we need to make sure that the economy and the structures within the economy don't create unfair disadvantages for us.
I think as we talk about bailouts in Europe, and I know, frankly, as we've got $16 trillion in debt, we're borrowing 42 cents of every single dollar. Apparently, we didn't pay the electric bill here either. I think what is important as we look at this, I think my opponent during the primary did say that he favored trying to provide assistance over to Europe. We've got some significant issues here, and we want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves at a disadvantage. And we've got to make sure that we are reining in the out-of-control spending right here at home. And so I do not favor a bailout. I do think that we have to talk about how do we create a robust economy here, and that I would point you to my Main Street Jobs agenda, which does focus on education, infrastructure, manufacturing, comprehensive tax reform, energy policy, and also reining in this outrageous amount of regulation that's coming in. We need regulation. We just want it to be smart regulation as opposed to volumes of it, which is paralyzing to business.
Thank you. Thank you. With the huge number of baby boomers retiring, what plan do you have to prevent Medicare and Social Security from running out of cash? And we'll start with you, Congressman.
Well, I think it's, as we look at Social Security and Medicare, I think first and foremost, I believe we have to strengthen our social safety net. I think it needs to be there for future generations as opposed to just worry about who's in it today. And therefore, things I've always said with regard to that is that two things have to happen if you want to talk about any changes to our social safety net. First, you have to have bipartisan support. Second thing you have to do is you have to keep your promises to the seniors, those that are in the system now, those that will be in the system shortly. Medicare, as we know it, is going bankrupt. They said in 12 years they had to readjust it down to 10. We cannot go by way of the ostrich and stick our head in the sand and think that it will magically reappear. I do think we have to talk about how do we change it so that it will be there for future generations. I've supported a bipartisan plan. Senator Wyden and Paul Ryan came together to talk about how do we make sure Medicare will be around for future generations, and really talking about changes for those under 55. But if we don't make these changes, it's going to impact seniors today, and that I think is absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you.
We need to make sure that the promises we make to our seniors and future generations are in place. We need to address the long-term consequences of healthcare inflation growing at twice the rate of normal inflation. But we cannot do it by taking Medicare and turning it into a voucher, as the Paul Ryan plan, which Mr. Dold voted for twice, would do. We cannot do it by continually asking seniors to pay more and carry more burden. So we talk about people who are under 55, my generation, who graduated and was told, you're going to be responsible for your own retirement. Put your money in a 401k. But buy a home, provide education for your kids. And when it was time for that generation to pay for their kids' education, the economy went completely upside down. Their 401k, as we used to joke 4 years ago, remember, it became a 201k and a 101k. At the time they had to pay for their kids' education, there was no equity in their home. This generation, sandwiched between taking care of our parents and our children, many of us without equity in our home, have to have a guarantee that our programs will be there in the future.
We're going to stick with healthcare for a while. The U.S. spends twice as much as other countries, yet our outcomes are only in the middle of the pack. What is your recipe for healthcare? And I'll start with you, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you. We are spending 1.5 to 2 times what other countries spend on healthcare without better outcomes. The Affordable Care Act takes us in a big step in the right direction, moving from a system that's based on volume to a system that's based on value. Moving to a system that provides people the opportunity to have preventative care, wellness care, and not treat everyday routine illnesses in the worst place possibly, what I'll call emergency care. Right? When you show up at an emergency room because you don't have health insurance, you haven't been able to go to a doctor, it is the most expensive place at the most expensive time. We need a system that provides people access to health care, their children access to health care, preventive care to lower our overall cost. To move from a system that continues to pay more and more and more for tests and services that don't give us any better outcomes, and reward doctors for quality care and better long-term outcomes. So that long-term we bring the cost of health care down.
Well, I do think we have to bring the cost of health care down. And certainly as we look at the Affordable Care Act, even the estimates, according to the CBO, they've doubled the cost estimates. It's not a lie, but thank you for participating. There's 21 new taxes that will be put in place. And let me just simply say, there are some aspects of the Affordable Care Act that I think are positive and need to be there. As a small business owner, there's no question that health care costs are outrageous. And they're going far outpacing inflation. But we didn't address, what we did with the Affordable Care Act was really address access to insurance. We did not address cost or quality. We didn't actually talk about medical malpractice reform, so doctors are picking up and leaving. We didn't address the ability for people to pool, or like businesses to be able to pool to drive costs down. These are some of the things that we have to do if we're serious about doing it. We need to have some consumer-driven care. What does it cost to get a knee replaced? What does it cost to get a hip replaced? Shouldn't we know that ahead of time, try to drive people towards the areas that have better outcomes and pick up a larger portion of those costs?
Any more outbursts, that person is going to have to leave. Ushers, please be vigilant.
I think they're okay.
Okay. How would you, to continue with that, Congressman, how would you provide health care for all?
Well, I think health care for all is certainly the goal. But what I'm hearing from people right now, and this is really the frightening part, an enormous percentage of those that are receiving their health care receive it through their employers. I talk to employers each and every day that say, you know what, I'm ready to pay the penalty and send them off, even if I pay what it costs me for health care, to send them on their own to go get it on, in essence, on the free market. I can think of few things more terrifying than to tell someone they're on their own to go get health insurance. So I do think we have to talk about consumer-driven care. We have to talk about how do we, again, address cost and quality, because there was a study that was done up in Wisconsin on a knee replacement. Hospital A was $57,000. Hospital B was $38,000. We associate better care with the hospital that does it for $57,000, but the outcomes actually were better at the hospital with $38,000. We should be able to steer people towards that hospital that does it for the lower cost, and guess what's going to happen to the hospital that's doing it for the $57,000? Costs are going down and outcomes are going up, or they're getting out of the business.
So we agree that we should move to a system for outcomes. The Affordable Care Act isn't perfect. No act is. But this Congress has voted 33 times to repeal, defund, and dismantle the Affordable Care Act. They have wasted 80 hours, $50 million, including a vote to repeal 2 weeks after the Supreme Court said that the Affordable Care Act was absolutely constitutional. We need to move this country forward. Healthcare in this country is a major challenge to our future. We need to move to outcomes. We need to move the opportunity for patients to understand what it costs, where they'll get the best outcome, and go to the $37,000 hospital for the better knee replacement. That's the point of the Affordable Care Act. But to have this intransigence in Washington that says we can't allow the president or the other party, regardless of which party it is, to have any successes, is exactly the challenges we face as a country and why so many of us are frustrated here at home watching what's happening in Washington.
Mr. Schneider, what are your positions on medical marijuana, legalization of marijuana, and the so-called war on drugs?
Well, I think we see each state making their own decisions on what to do about medical marijuana, and I think I'll leave it at that. But as we do look at the war on drugs, it is a border issue, it is an international issue. We need to work with our global partners, with the folks in Mexico, and make sure that we are protecting our citizens, protecting our borders, and working together to reduce the horrible violence we're seeing in Latin America. There was a report of the 10 deadliest cities in the world, and 8 of them were in Mexico and Central America, all because of this drug war. We can't let people die around the world and in this country from drug abuse. It's immoral. We need to work together with these countries to protect the citizens of their countries and the citizens of our countries from the drug war.
Thank you, Congressman.
I think as we look at medical marijuana, certainly if there's a true medical need for it, obviously the states will make that determination. But the war on drugs is a big one, and it impacts us right here at home. Here in Lake County, actually, if you look at heroin overdoses, if you look at the map of the United States, the worst place in the country is right here in Lake County. Most people don't realize that. You choose to use heroin once, and it's in our schools, and it's prevalent around the area. It has come in across the border. Certainly, we've got citizens here in the 10th District, Peter Benzinger, who's right down here, headed up the Drug Enforcement Task Force for President Nixon and President Ford. Certainly we look to these individuals to help us, but one of the things that we do know, prescription drugs are the gateway into these other more illicit drugs, and it's a huge problem. Oxycodone and Oxycontin has to be changed the label with the FDA, and we have to crack down on these illegal drugs that are prevalent in Lake County.
We have a lot of questions on women's reproductive rights and health issues, and I'm going to ask you this question. The questioner is very specific about what he or she wants answered. So where do you stand on women's reproductive rights health issues? Be specific on requiring insurance coverage for reproductive services. Be specific on allowing hospitals to deny abortions. Would you allow pharmacists to deny filling prescriptions for morning after or other medications such as family planning? Would you allow equal access for poor women? So that's 4 points there. If you can't remember them, we can go to the next question.
No, we'll be happy
we can roll it over. Okay.
Let me just try to start, and I'll try to be as specific as I can with regard to women's health. I want to make sure that you all hear directly from me. I want to make sure that we're protecting a woman's right to choose. I stood up on the House floor and was the only Republican to do so against defunding Planned Parenthood. My opponent's going to come back and say, well, then you turned around to vote for H.R. 1, which, frankly, was funding the government. We didn't want to shut the government down. So I got a letter, actually, from the head of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, that said, this was after the H.R. 1 vote that he's going to criticize me for in about 20 seconds. Thank the congressman for his unwavering and courageous support for women's health care access. I'm so grateful for his vote in ending the ability for women against ending the ability for women to receive preventative health care at Planned Parenthood centers. I recognize the enormous pressure that your boss was under. I want to make sure, and I have stood up and will continue to stand up to make sure that women's health care is available.
I am 100% pro-choice. I always have been. Mr. Dold did stand up on the floor of the Congress on one day, and the very next day voted to defund Planned Parenthood. But he also voted a couple months later to put an increased burden on small businesses that provide health care to their employees that include abortion, treating men and women equally on full access to comprehensive health care. He voted last fall for a bill numbered H.R. 358, what the Republicans call the Protect Life Act, and the Democrats call the Let Women Die Act. This bill would have allowed hospitals to deny women a life-saving termination or abortion if it was against hospital policy to do so, not giving the woman the choice. I would not have voted for those bills. The women of this district deserve someone who will represent them in Congress all their term, 100% of the time. There's a reason that NARAL Pro-Choice America gave me their endorsement, because I am 100% pro-choice.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Schneider, we'll continue with you. Do you think we should cut family planning services both in this country and from countries to whom we give foreign aid? And what's the difference to you?
The difference between?
That's the question.
I do not think we should cut family planning in this country. Planned Parenthood, 3% of its budget is for abortions, 0% of the money it gets from government. But Planned Parenthood provides for women prenatal health care, cancer screenings, preventative health care. These are the things that lead to a healthier family. In many of these families of single parents, the sole provider to those children, we need to continue to provide family planning here in this country. And I think we should continue to support it around the world. Okay. Family planning helps people decide when they want to have their children. It helps people have the opportunity, young women in Africa, Europe, other countries, developing countries, have the opportunity to get the education to provide the economic wherewithal for their families. When we make moral decisions of one sort or another, forcing life-changing consequences on people around the world, I just think that's wrong.
Family planning is important, but before we jump down that family planning path, let me just go back to something my opponent just said in the last answer, saying that, in essence, I voted to let women die. I think that, frankly, is offensive. My sister's an OBGYN, and I think for the medical professionals that are out there, to say that they've taken a Hippocratic oath that they are going to all of a sudden let women die, I think it's offensive. I think it's offensive to them, and I think it's offensive to those that have taken that Hippocratic oath. As we look at family planning is something that I've certainly stood up for and believe it's important, not just here in the United States, but abroad. And I think, as I spoke before the Budget Committee on the priorities that are out there, certainly family planning, Title X funding, is important, and one of the things that I stood up for and said was a priority for me, that we made sure that we continued in the budget, that there was family planning dollars in the United States through organizations like Planned Parenthood, but also abroad as well.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider, we'll start with you. We're going to switch topics. How do you stand on the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United? Are you pro or con?
We're out of order. I don't want to go out of order, but if you want to go first, or I'll go first.
I'm happy to go first. Citizens United, when it first came out, I said that it was going to be very bad. I said that it was going to take, in essence, voices away from ordinary citizens. There would be a flood of capital that was going to be coming in through organizations and corporations, and I felt that it would most likely, at that point in time, early on, I thought it was going to be corporations who, frankly, have shareholders that will probably not allow them to do so. What we've seen is shell organizations that are putting together, obviously hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into campaigns that will, in essence, dilute your ability as citizens to have a wider or louder voice. So I do think that what will end up happening is legislation will come through. That's something that I did in the past. I worked on campaign finance reform, and something that I think will happen legislatively in the next several years.
I think the frustration so many of us feel as we watch elections is that every day voters' voices are drowned out. And you get into this back and forth of organizations, we don't know who they are, saying things we don't know what their position or incentive or vested interest is on what they're saying. We can't have the debate between Mr. Dold and me because there are outside groups under the auspices of Citizens United who can come in and can hijack our elections. The presidential election, we're seeing a handful of billionaires trying to control the dialogue we should be having as citizens. I think Citizens United will go down as one of the worst decisions in our country's history. I was hopeful the Supreme Court would overrule it this past summer. They chose not to. I'm committed, when I get to Congress, to doing everything I can that we take back our elections, that we put the voices into the candidates and the power back into the voters, and take it away from corporations and others who aren't sharing our interests.
We're going to switch topics now. What are your positions on gun violence and gun control?
I think I start. Just this morning, I opened the paper and saw that 2 young teenagers were killed in Chicago, 27 other people were shot. I think this is something where we would both agree that violence in our cities, in our communities, is a tragic dilemma, tragic phenomenon we're seeing. Epidemic is the word I'm looking for. Tragic epidemic we're seeing throughout our country. We need to restore the ban on assault weapons that the Bush administration let expire in 2004. We need to ban high-capacity magazines that allow someone to walk in a theater like he did in Colorado and within a minute fire off 600 rounds. We need to close the loophole that allows more and more guns to be sold without the background checks that would prevent people who are criminals or mentally insane from getting guns and wreaking violence on our communities. This is something where both parties need to come together and protect our young people and protect our communities.
Congressman?
I am for responsible gun ownership with reasonable restrictions. That's what I've always said. I've worked with Mayor Bloomberg and mayors against illegal guns to try to make sure that we're getting guns out of the hands of terrorists, mentally ill, felons, because we don't want to have these tragedies happen. And certainly we're going to allow states, I think, to have more and more of a say in terms of what's right for their areas, which is one of the reasons why I voted against a one-size-fits-all concealed carry, to again push that back down to the states. Again, that was one where I was in a small minority on my side of the aisle, but I believe it's the right thing to do. And in November, I will receive the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence Award, something that I think is important. We need to make sure that we're closing the gun show loophole. We need to make sure that we're not allowing these weapons to be able to get into the hands of people that want to do harm.
Thank you. Knowing that same-sex couples do not receive equal benefits under the law, is it conscionable to continue discriminating based on sexual orientation? And I think it's you first.
One of the reasons why I actually co-sponsored a bill, one of the few Republicans to do so, talking about taxpayer parity for same-sex couples, making sure that they can get those same health care benefits as normal married couples can. And that's something that I'll continue to fight for.
So where you see overlap on gun control, this is an issue where you see a wide gulf between our respective positions. I fundamentally believe that two people who want to make a life together, provide a family, should have the right to do so, period. Mr. Dold opposes marriage equality. He supports the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. I believe that people, regardless of their sexual orientation, their religion, their color, should be paid the same for the jobs that they do. Mr. Dold opposes the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And I believe and I celebrated when our military repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The general said it would not have an impact, and a year later, it has not had an impact. But Mr. Dold opposed repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There are very clear differences here. I believe my opponent's on the wrong side of history. I believe as we go forward to be the country we can be, we need to have marriage equality, we need to have employment equality, and we need to have everyone in our services.
What do you think about reduction of military spending? Mr. Schneider.
Well, I think we've talked about this before. We have too many constituencies, if you will, who have a vested interest in protecting and preserving weapon systems and military programs that are focused on Cold War mentality. We can eliminate those and redeploy those dollars and reduce our overall defense spending while focusing on the very real threats we face in the world. We have serious challenges to our safety and security in this country. We have challenges that are no longer nation states, but are organizations operating within failed nation states. We need to make sure that we have the forces and the weapon systems that will allow us to protect those. But we also need to be sure that we're investing in the soft power, the diplomacy, the economic aid that can make sure that long-term countries like Somalia, like Yemen, have a potential to create safe environments and get rid of the organizations that are causing us harm.
Let me go back, if I can, just for a second. As an employer, I employ 100 people. For me, it's 100 families. There's no room for discrimination in the workplace. And I don't want to see discrimination in the workplace. My opponent said that I opposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the repeal of it. In the midst of two conflicts at the time where those on the ground, the military commanders on the ground, said not now, I certainly am going to take my cues from the military commanders. I don't support a reinstatement of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. When it comes to defense spending cuts, we find ourselves today in a very unique position. This idea that there's going to be an additional $600 billion worth of cuts coming out of the Department of Defense. Obviously, you know the turmoil that's going on in the Middle East right now. Secretary Panetta has come to the Congress and said, we cannot do the very core basic functions that you've asked us to do if you want us to institute these cuts. Remember earlier we talked about the Department of Defense is already cutting $458 billion out of defense. An additional $600 billion could be crippling to our very core basic function to protect our citizens.
We're going to switch to the environment now, and we may only have time for 2 more questions. If you talk fast, maybe 3. The 10th District has a long history of being environmentally concerned. How will you be a leader on the environment?
Well, I have been a leader on the environment, and I'm proud of the record, stood up against my party on several things, whether it be clean air or clean water, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And just to put that into some sort of perspective, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the President proposed in his budget $300 million. It came through out of the House at $225. I actually had an amendment to plus that up and work with Steve LaTourette to get it to where the President wanted. I look at it locally. One of the things that I've been focusing on is trying to clean up the Waukegan Harbor, working with the US EPA and the Illinois EPA to try to make sure that that gets delisted. I've been recognized as the Congressional Outdoor Champion for 2011 and 2012. As a Scoutmaster and Eagle Scout, let me just tell you, it hits home. Trying to protect the Great Lakes where my children swim, where I swim, where my father swam is very important. And I will continue and always be a champion for the outdoors. Voted against trying to drill in Anwar. In fact, wrote an op-ed against it. So I will continue to be a champion for the environment.
I'm sorry, but this is just a case where the rhetoric doesn't meet the record. My opponent has voted 211 times against the environment. He did vote to allow drilling in Lake Michigan. He did vote to cut funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative by $250 million. These are the facts. The Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, groups that in the past endorsed his predecessor, Mark Kirk, looked at his record and gave me their endorsement. There is a clear difference on the environment. I will protect our environment. I will make sure that the legacy we leave to our children, our natural legacy, our natural resources, our national parks, will be protected and will pass to the next generation. But I'll also make sure that the EPA, to protect our water, to protect our air, will be able to do just that so that we have less asthma, less chronic illnesses that are causing a demand on our health care and raising costs there as well. We addressed acid rain in our lifetime. We need to address what we can do for climate change. There is a clear choice on the environment here.
Last question. We have several on this. How will you help to break the gridlock in Congress?
The whole reason I'm in this race, as much as anything, is because the gridlock in Congress is hurting our economy and hurting our future. We have seen a Congress that promised us jobs and a return to fiscal balance, and instead all we got was partisan bickering and debates about contraception. If we can send people to Congress who are willing to listen before they speak, people to Congress, I've taught my kids, I've told my clients, I don't need to prove you wrong to be confident in what I believe, but I'm not so certain of anything I know not to listen to what you have to say. If we can send people to Congress who will reach across the aisle, who will find areas for collaboration, even on the smallest things from the first day. Mr. Dold talks about introducing a bill a year and a half ago on the environment. 18 months later, that bill still sits there with the same 2 co-sponsors it started with and no progress. We need to find ways to work together and push forward and make things happen and make a difference.
As we look at how we end the gridlock in Congress, I would say, first of all, you have to lead by example. Before the Chicago Tribune, Brad basically said he could find no issue where he disagrees with his party. Yesterday at ABC 7, I asked him, what 3 issues would you break with your party and try to help build consensus? He came up with 1 on small business, which I hope the Democrats aren't opposed to small business. Time and time and time again, I've broken with my party, whether it be with the environment, women's health, transportation and infrastructure, you name it, gun control, education, and I'll continue to do so. I think it's important that we work across the aisle to find solutions. How about the first bipartisan budget to come to the floor in a generation? Was a leader on that. And I just want to end, if I can, from a Daily Herald and their thing that said, you know, my opponent, who just made a soliloquy a bit ago, said his willingness to blatantly misrepresent Dold's position and candidacy is troubling to say the least. It suggests that if elected, he would fall into the same reflective partisanship that stops Washington from addressing real problems.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. We've finished the questions. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's question. We now go to closing statements. Each candidate has 1.5 minutes, and Mr. Schneider is going first.
Thank you. This election truly is a choice about priorities, a choice about the direction we take this country. We have seen this past 2 years a Congress who laid out their priorities starkly and clearly to make sure that this president can have no successes upon which to hang his hat. Passing a budget that takes Medicare and turns it into a voucher program for seniors, which the AARP says will cost seniors more, which independent analysis say will cost seniors $6,400 a year, more than what they're paying today. Something that is clearly unsustainable. We have seen in this Congress, a Congress that has voted 300 times against our environment, diluting protections for our air and our water and putting our children's health at risk. We have seen in this Congress repeatedly efforts to give more tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans and subsidies to companies shipping jobs overseas while ignoring the needs of small businesses and middle-class families. We need to end the screaming across the aisles. We need to find ways to come and work together. I'm committed to doing that. I've done it my entire life. If you watched my primary, you know that I was attacked because I worked with and contributed to Mark Kirk. I have worked across the aisle for a very long time. I will continue to work across the aisle in Washington. I've spent my career helping people find common ground, establish common goals, and work together towards a common purpose. I've done it for my entire career. I'm not going to change. It's what I'll do as your congressman. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for the opportunity to join you today to talk about some of the critical issues facing our country. I'm proud to say that I've lived up to my vow to put people before politics and progress before partisanship to move our country forward. Independent organizations have done an analysis of my entire voting record, and all of them have ranked me as one of the most independent, bipartisan members of the United States Congress. But your homework is not to take my word for it. Go to govtracks.us. Look for yourself. Go to Congressional Quarterly, who said the #1 Republican most willing to work with the other side is me. My experience as a small businessman, someone that meets a budget and a payroll, and understand what it's like to actually sign the front of a paycheck. I know the pressures that people are under with rising health care costs and regulations, and how that impacts either hiring that next person or keeping those folks employed. I was born and raised here, and I'm raising my family here. And my opponent is trying to paint me out as something that you know that I'm not. And frankly, that's just unacceptable. But don't take my word for it. Take the Daily Herald, the Chicago Tribune, who have taken the time that work on Washington. They work on Springfield. They've done the analysis. What I'm here to tell you is that I'm proud of my record. This district deserves thoughtful, independent leadership, somebody with vision and leadership, someone that understands the economy and business. So whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, I ask you to cast party labels aside and join me. On November 6th, I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
They weren't as rowdy as I thought they'd be.
So much. You did a wonderful
Thank
job.
you. Please be seated so we can begin. Hello? Please be seated. I'm Jan Flappen from the League of Women Voters, and I'd like to introduce the candidates for Illinois House and Illinois Senate. For the State Representative 58th District, Scott Drury and Mark Shaw. Scott is the Democratic candidate, Mark is the Republican. For State Senate 29th District, Julie Morrison is the Democratic candidate and Arie Friedman is the Republican candidate. And now I'd like to ask you to make sure your cell phones and all electronic equipment is turned off And please hold your applause from now on until the end of the debate. We have 4 candidates. They're going to be answering each question. So to make sure we get a lot of questions in, it would be helpful if there weren't any interruptions. They have flipped a coin for who goes first. And we are going to start with, let's start with the House, the lower House. They're supposedly the lower body. And the first opening, Mr. Drury won the coin toss, and he is going to go first for the opening statement. He has 1.5 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Drury, and I'm running for state representative to usher in a new era of government in Illinois, an era defined by credibility and responsibility, not one defined by corruption and political expediency. I'm a former federal prosecutor who worked under Patrick Fitzgerald for over 7 years. From that experience, I know that Illinois cannot move forward simply by getting bad politicians out of office. We need to make sure that we put good, honest people into office. I am one of those people. I grew up in the district, and with my wife Shelby and my 2 kids who are in attendance today, we live up in Fort Sheridan. In addition to being an attorney at a prominent Chicago law firm, I'm also an adjunct professor at the Northwestern University School of Law. This is my first time running for public office, but I've already begun making good on my campaign promise to work with Democrats, Republicans, and independents to move this state forward through its tough fiscal issues. My campaign is backed by the business community and the labor community. Both the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce and the Illinois AFL-CIO are backing my candidacy. Why do I tell you this? Because if we're going to fix the fiscal mess in Illinois, we need people who are going to work across party lines, not people who are only going to talk to their own party. My opponent and I disagree on this. We disagree on some other things too. I'm the pro-choice candidate in this race. My opponent is not. I believe in keeping our neighborhoods safe with responsible, sensible gun legislation. My opponent does not. Together we can usher in a new era of government in Illinois. I thank you so much for attending today, and I look forward to not only earning your support, but your trust.
Hold your applause, please. Mr. Shaw.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Shaw, and I'm running for state representative in the 58th District. This district stretches north to south from the Great Lakes Naval Base down to the northern part of Glencoe and east to west from Lake Michigan over to approximately the Tri-State Tollway. I'm 51 years old. I've been married for 22 years. I have an 11-year-old son, and I've lived in Lake Forest for 21 years. I'm a pharmacist and a lawyer. As a pharmacist, I managed retail drugstores. Later, after becoming a lawyer, I worked in Chicago for the law firms of Winston & Strawn and Seifert Shaw. Since that time, I opened my own law practice in Waukegan, where I have approximately a dozen people working with me. For 21 years, I've been active in my local community here in Lake Forest, volunteering time to organizations like the Lake Forest Caucus, the Lake Forest Teen Court, the Lake Forest Plan Commission, and presently as the Cub Master for Lake Forest Cub Scouts Pack 48. I'm running for state representative because Illinois is virtually bankrupt, both financially and in leadership. Like many voters, I've had enough with the way Springfield has ruined our state. This is largely due to irresponsible career politicians in Springfield. I too, like my opponent, believe that we should have people down there that want to contribute to public service and not to create a job for themselves. Career politicians like Mike Madigan answer our concerns about the anemic economy, the out-of-control income taxes and property taxes.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go to the State Senate now, and Mr. Friedman has the first opening statement.
Thank you for everybody for coming. My name is Dr. Arie Friedman, and I'm a general pediatrician. As of 8 days ago, one of the managing partners of the largest general pediatrics practice in Illinois. I'm a former Navy helicopter pilot, retired in 2005 from the reserves, and was on active duty during the Desert Storm with 406 shipboard landings during that time. And I'm running for state senate because I believe Illinois is on the wrong track. I think most of us share that belief, that when you look at the economic circumstances that we live in today, the things that brought our families here to Illinois, my family's been here now for 6 generations, were the opportunity for economic prosperity, and they are at real risk based upon the mismanagement in Springfield for the last 10 years. Let's be clear. In Illinois, the problem is that we have had not just one party rule, but we have had rule by a very small handful of leaders. And what we do going forward, how we decide what's going to happen here in Illinois, whether our children can come back and have a prosperous future in this state that for me has been a wonderful place to live, depends on what we do with this next election. I will be a principled vote in Springfield for doing things differently, for taking a different path, for having a business-friendly environment, for reducing the load on businesses, for repealing the taxes that were passed in the middle of the night just 2 years ago. So my name is Dr. Arie Friedman. I hope I can earn your vote today, and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Morrison.
My name is Julie Morrison. I'm running for State Senate as the Democratic candidate because I've seen firsthand what good legislators can do for individuals and for the communities that they live in. I'm a 30-year resident of Deerfield, where my husband and I raised our 3 children. I'm serving my 4th term, 16th year, as West Deerfield Township Supervisor, which is an elected position which has me acting as the Chief Financial Officer as a unit of local government. Besides that, I've taken on the responsibilities of being the social services caseworker and managing the food pantry. A lot of people are going to say in this election cycle that they are fiscally responsible and that they are bipartisan. This afternoon, I want to tell you that I'm someone who has a 16-year record of doing just that. For the last 16 years, I have balanced the budget for the township. I have consistently had the lowest tax rate of any other township in Lake County, and that last year we actually were able to dial our levy back 5%. At the same time, we've been responsive to the needs of people in our community, and I've been able to work in a bipartisan manner with all levels of government, state, county, other township, municipalities to accomplish that. I'm looking forward to this afternoon and being able to share some of my values and some of my ideas with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to note that the rules say no visual aids are allowed by the candidates, and 3 of the 4 candidates have visual aids. Dr. Friedman, how do you feel about? I don't think you have any.
I think they should use whatever notes they want.
Okay, if you don't mind, then they can keep their visual aids. And I'd like to remind the audience that all questions will go to all candidates, so please don't direct them toward only 1 or 2 candidates. We're going to start the first question, and I think we'll start with, on this end, with Mr. Drury. Many people are concerned with corruption in state government. What experience in your background makes you think you are uniquely qualified to bring ethics reform to Illinois state government?
I, before running for office, was a federal prosecutor who worked under Patrick Fitzgerald for 7.5 years. During that time, I worked on public corruption cases. I prosecuted a member of Governor Blagojevich's administration. I prosecuted officials in the Melrose Park Police Department. I have called for ethics reform that many of my colleagues tried to pass when Governor Blagojevich was arrested and indicted the first time. I think there should be term limits for legislative leaders. I believe that legislative leaders should only have one job, which is being a legislative leader. There is no one sitting up at this table who can talk more about ethics and pushing for ethics reform and making a change when it comes to corruption than me. It has been my passion. I have the experience. I have seen Illinois as up close and personal on the corruption side as anybody has. And that's why I'm sitting here, because not only can we do better, we have to do better, we must do better, and we will do better.
Go ahead. Next. Yes, we'll just go down the line.
I appreciate Mr. Drury's work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I appreciate the fact that he believes that he can spearhead certain types of ethics reform in Springfield. Unfortunately, Mr. Drury has been bought and paid for by Mike Madigan and the supporters of Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan is trying to hang on to all of his power in the state of Illinois. He got Mr. Drury to step out of the state's attorney's race because they wanted to see a particular candidate become the Lake County State's Attorney. He also then decided to be a state representative because Mr. Madigan asked him to, and he's received tens of thousands of dollars from Mr. Madigan to be elected state's representative. Mr. Madigan doesn't give out tens of thousands of dollars and not expect something in return. So I'm glad that Mr. Drury says he's going to be a champion of ethics reform. I don't believe he'll have the ability, given who his supporters are and who his fiscal backer is.
Thank you.
Ms. Morrison.
Transparency in government is going to give us confidence in government again, and that's going to lead to investment and growth for us. There's some very basic ways we can start by making state government more transparent so that we can believe in it again. Somebody like me who can go on a computer and with just a few clicks should be able to find where bids have been given, where contracts are, how much individuals are paid, where different candidates have received donations from. We need to make sure that the state begins to become more transparent. I think it's easy, I think it's straightforward, I think that the state's people really expect it.
Well, I've had the opportunity, the privilege of being in two professions where ethical standards are of the highest importance. As a naval aviator, as a physician, underlying ethical understandings are core to what we do. I'll tell you that I've been pretty shocked at what's gone on during the time I've been running for office, what I've seen down in Springfield, what I've seen happen in campaigns. And I'll tell you what I've been telling everybody else, which is that everything you've ever heard about Illinois politics is completely true. It just is. And the reality is that we need people from a different part of our community to start running for office. It's part of the reason I decided to run. We need physicians, we need people from the business community, and honestly, I think it's time to stop voting in the same kind of people who've always been there all along. Just a few days ago, I had the opportunity to stand with some of the legislative leaders and commit to a platform of forensically auditing every level of government, making sure that we understand what's happening in every level of government, from the cities all the way up to the states. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to see as a start for getting rid of corruption in Illinois.
Thank you. We'll start the next question with, and I forgot your name, sorry, Mr. Shaw. You can tell I'm not from the district. Where do you stand on pension reform? Specifically, what is the school district's responsibility toward funding teacher pensions?
I'm a strong believer in government pension reform. This is one of the reasons that I chose to run for this position, because this is probably the single biggest problem facing Illinois. If we don't solve this problem soon, we won't have a state left to live in, or that anybody would want to live in. I do not believe, unlike my opponent, that the local school district should be responsible for the underfunded and unfunded pension liabilities that the state of Illinois has created, in particular with the teachers' retirement system. The teachers' retirement system has been supposed to be funded by the members as well as the state of Illinois since its inception. Unfortunately, it hasn't been done. People like Mike Madigan and his cronies down there have decided to use the money for other purposes and not for what it was intended. Mr. Madigan now has announced that he wants to transfer that liability to our local school districts and raise our property taxes. Mr. Drury agrees with that approach. I'm opposed to that. I think we need to place responsibility where it should be, and we should not try to kick the can down the road or transfer responsibility to people that aren't responsible for the problem.
Thank you. Ms. Morrison.
The state created a huge mess with our education pension system. It is not right to put that back on our local school districts. Absolutely not right, and I'm completely against that. That being said, it's time to balance action with negotiations. The longer we delay pension reform, real pension reform, the more likely we are for another downgrade, and our debt will continue. It's absolutely the first thing that has to be voted on in the next General Assembly, if not before.
Yeah, I think some straight talk on the issue of pensions in Illinois is in order. We talk about unfunded pension mandates. Let's be clear. This is debt. We owe this money. And the amount of money we owe is a lot higher than most people talk about. Let's talk about the liability side, not the asset side, but the liability side. Between now and 2045, and this is not my number, this is from the actuaries who work for the state, Illinois owes $609 billion in pension payments, and that's covered by around $90 billion in assets. Nobody who looks at those numbers seriously thinks that that can be paid without some serious changes in how we run pensions in this state. So, look, I think we need to be very careful about how we handle people who are in the system right now. I've got a brother-in-law who's a professor at Eastern. My wife is a former Chicago school teacher who's invested in the pension system. But we're going to have to make serious changes and commit to it, and we can talk about that as we go along.
Okay, Mr. Drury.
You know, we're only 2 questions in, and the big divide between me and Mr. Shaw has already shown its ugly face. The fact is, my campaign is based on truth and facts, and when it comes to finances, we need to look at the facts. And Mr. Shaw's campaign is 35% funded by the House Republican Organization and the Illinois Republican Party. Mine is far less funded. The biggest contributor to my campaign is me, and that will give me the independence that I need to do what needs to get done in Springfield. When it comes to pensions, I don't know how many times I can say I've said it in writing. I am not for shifting the tax burden up to the school districts. Doesn't matter how many times it's said in mail, how many lies are told about me, it is absolutely fundamentally not true. The fact is, what I want to do is thoughtful. If we can get the pension mess under control, what we can do is then require the state to adequately fund the school, the education funding that they're supposed to provide, and then if there is not an increase in our tax burden, we can have that shifted up here because it makes sense. But the fact is that Mr. Shaw wants to deceive all of you with lies and deceit, and I'm going to continue, as I did as a prosecutor, to tell you the truth, and that is how we're going to win this election.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
We've all answered the question.
I lost track. Okay, the next question has 2 parts, and I'd like to make it faster, just a yes or no. Would you support a constitutional amendment, given our state's financial condition, would you support a constitutional amendment, 1, for graduate income tax, 2, for taxing retirement income? And we'll start with Ms. Morrison.
Yes to the first. I think that's something that the state of Illinois needs to look at. We have an antiquated tax system, and we need to have something that is fair and more efficient. The second is no.
All right, Dr. Friedman.
No and no. And in regards to the first, I think the states that have done that have realized the reality, which is that people can move. So Maryland, when they instituted their millionaires tax, saw 3,000 millionaires leave the state and take with them their businesses in many cases. So the answer to that is no and no.
Go ahead.
The answer to the first is no at this time, and the answer to the second one is no. Illinois is in no position to be asking anybody to pay more taxes. Illinois is like the irresponsible child who parties his way through college and then asks his parents for more money to pay the rent. Until Illinois can show some responsibility, we cannot keep going back to the taxpayers and asking for more money because we don't know that if good money is going after bad.
Mr. Shaw, go ahead.
Well, I'm glad to hear that Mr. Drury has decided to speak truth to us. He told us that he does not approve of a graduated income tax at this time. Well, at what time will he support a graduated income tax? Our legislative leaders and our governor told us just a couple of years ago that they were going to pass a temporary income tax increase. What they didn't tell you is that they sold the projected revenues off to bondholders so they could have the money up front and spend it now. Doesn't sound too temporary to me. Not at this time is code words for until after I get elected. Okay, Mr. Drury tells you that he doesn't support tax increases, notwithstanding his protestations to the contrary, as we say in our legal profession. Mr. Drury does support a shifting of the teachers' retirement system burden to the local school districts and a doubling or tripling of our property taxes. He can say as much as he wants that my campaign is lying about him. He needs to look only at his own mailers when he wants to find lies about me. Thank you.
The next question, Dr. Friedman will answer first. Illinois now has one of the highest foreclosure rates in the country. What do you advocate for solving this problem and helping the real estate market recover?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say how grateful I am for the Illinois Association of Realtors to have been such strong supporters of my campaign. I received their endorsement and very strong support. The reality is that Illinois real estate will only recover when the Illinois economy recovers. We can talk about various measures to help sort of staunch the bleeding, as we say in my profession, for homeowners. But the reality is that we have a terrible economy in Illinois, 9.1 unemployment, increased indebtedness, and a generally unfavorable climate for business. So how do we fix that? We elect people who care about business. We elect people who care about the prosperity of Illinoisans. We elect people like me who've committed to voting to repeal the tax increase, who've committed to examining local areas of government to make sure there's less corruption. And frankly, people like me will go to Springfield and get new leadership in our state to get us back on the right track.
There's a couple things that can be done to deal with the foreclosure problem. One of them is something that I dealt with firsthand at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is going after the predatory lenders and the people committing mortgage fraud. Advances have been made, but the job certainly is not done. Also, Illinois needs to get its economy rolling again. And the fact is, I've been endorsed by the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. The Illinois Manufacturers Society Association is backing our campaign because the business associations know that when it comes to improving Illinois, there's only one candidate that really has a plan. And that plan isn't to starve Illinois for funds, but it's to put a plan to where Illinois can be in 5 years, in 10 years, instead of always just trying to save our bond rating. Illinois right now gets extorted every time a company wants to leave the state. We have to get out of that business and get into the business of where we see our state for the future of our children, for the future of our grandchildren. And the fact is, I'm the only one in this race who has a plan, who's been willing to speak honestly to the public and give them honest answers, not the answers they want to hear, but the answers that they need to hear to get our economy going again.
Thank you.
I've been in this campaign now for several months against Mr. Drury, and I've yet to hear what his plan is to get Illinois back on the right track again. All I've heard is that he's not willing to create a graduated income tax for the residents of Illinois at this time. And frankly, he has said that he believes in a pension liability shift to the local school districts, which will double or triple our property taxes. I personally believe that the issue of foreclosures is probably one of the most private industry issues that is facing us right now and is causing a major problem in our economy in Illinois. I represent numerous clients who are trying to save their houses from foreclosure. Notwithstanding that, I have been endorsed by the Bankers Association because they know that I am the type of person that is willing to look at all sides of an issue. We have a lot of loans out there that probably shouldn't have been made. Obviously, we saw that with the meltdown 4 years ago. I believe what we need to do is sit down and figure out exactly how many of these homes are underwater and put a stop to the misleading information we've been receiving from the administration.
Thank you.
It's not uncommon for me to have someone come into my office at the township and talk to me about the foreclosure situation that they are actually living in at the time. I've gotten to see the humility and the pain that is associated with families that live right here in our communities with us. We can begin to staunch those foreclosures by making sure that the loans that are given out responsibly to people who are actually able to accommodate them, but we need to build our employment base. We need to make sure that we are building the tax base by building more taxpayers into it. People that come in and talk about their property taxes, the seniors are hanging on sometimes just by their fingernails. We've got to make sure that every property tax, every body of local government, the taxes, can justify its existence, and there are no exceptions to that.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Drury will begin. How should the state of Illinois address the health care needs of the uninsured?
Illinois needs to do several things. One, it needs to make sure that the needs of our neediest people are taken care of at all times. That is a social contract that we have made with the needy and with the people that need health care. And in the long run, it will cost our state less money to do that. I think a lot of progress was made this year with the Medicaid reform that Illinois went through, and I think that the job is not done. The fact is, Illinois needs to get its pensions in order because that is sucking up our budget. And if we can get the pensions in order and we can bring jobs back to Illinois, we will have the revenue that Illinois needs to take care of all the services that we need. It doesn't mean just pulling the plug on everything today. It means having a plan and moving forward with that plan. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can take the word of the Chamber of Commerce. You can take the word of the Manufacturers Association. You can take the word of Governor Jim Edgar, who appointed me as one of 40 emerging leaders in the state when he started up his inaugural fellowship program. And I was one of those 40 people that he selected to be one of the future leaders of the state.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. As a small business person, I deal every day with the issue of my employees having adequate access to health care. One of the reasons that I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses is because they know I have an understanding of just how real people deal with these problems on a real-time basis. I'm the person sitting up here today in this race that has actually made a payroll, signed the front side of a check, as Bob Dold says from time to time, and not the back side of a check. I don't have a long tenure of service in government jobs like my opponent does. What we have to do is we have to determine what the purpose is of our Medicaid funding. For too long, we have decided that Medicaid funding would be expanded, the number of benefits would be increased, the eligibility would be increased so that we have many more people on this particular program than it was designed to pay for. Medicaid is a safety net for the people that are in the poorest situation in our communities. It's not something that is a giveaway program by politicians in Springfield to get reelected.
Thank you. Before we go on, I've been asked to inform you that some of the questions are not readable. So please write clearly. And the program will go to 4 o'clock because we started late. I'm sorry, Ms. Morrison.
Thanks. Last year, I had a man in my office that actually had a stroke. We had to call the paramedics to come in. He was taken to Highland Park Hospital. I actually followed the ambulance because I knew he didn't have any relatives in the community. And while he was there, he said he didn't want to stay and be treated because he didn't have insurance and he didn't have money to buy medication. That is absolutely unacceptable in Highland Park, in Lake County, anywhere in the state of Illinois. We are better than that. There is no one who should make life and death decisions because they don't have life insurance or they don't have health insurance. We can control the cost of Medicaid. We can begin to coordinate care better. We've already begun reforms in Medicaid. There's more work to do. But to think that we have people in our state without any kind of coverage is not acceptable to me.
Dr. Friedman.
From 1994 through 2002, I trained and practiced on the south side of Chicago. And the vast majority of people who we saw were either on Medicaid or were uninsured. And I can tell you that the healthcare safety net in Illinois is in a shambles. Shouldn't surprise you that if I'm so honored just to be elected, I'll be the first physician ever elected to the Illinois General Assembly. And you can see that in how we've built what should be a compassionate and caring system. So the reality is that there are lots of opportunities in what other states have done to improve their healthcare systems, their safety net, that we can take advantage of. Florida has done some tremendous work in examining how you can create a healthcare system that covers everybody who's needy, that cuts costs, improves satisfaction, brings healthcare providers back into the system, and proves to be an overall win-win for everybody. That's the sort of thing that I hope if I get elected I can champion as the only physician in the General Assembly.
Thank you. We are going to start with, did everybody answer? You're all looking at me like I missed somebody. We're going to start with Mr. Shaw for the next question. We have quite a few questions, not quite a few, but several on reproductive choice. So how do you stand on reproductive choice and women's reproductive health?
Well, as a pharmacist, I have counseled a number of women on their health care decisions. As a pharmacist, I take an oath to do no harm, not unlike Dr. Friedman does as a physician. And I believe that it's my responsibility as a healthcare provider to work with women as well as men and children to come up with the best decisions for them in treating their healthcare problems. As far as the issue of reproductive choice, I answered the League's questionnaire, voter guideline, which is online, and I believe that this is a very personal issue between individuals and their maker, if you will. And frankly, I don't believe this election is about that issue. It's about the sorry fiscal state of Illinois. I understand that there are those up here, my opponent included, that would like to turn this race into an issue about women's reproductive rights because they don't have any clear answers on how to solve the fiscal responsibilities in the state of Illinois.
Thank you. Ms. Morrison.
I'm very pleased to tell you that I'm the candidate in the state Senate race that is endorsed by Personal PAC and by Planned Parenthood, because they know that I am the only candidate who is 100% pro-choice, who trusts other women to make those decisions for themselves, who trust them to take care of their own reproductive health care, and I will be someone who stands firm and tall on this when I go to Springfield.
So I'm pro-choice, but I am not embarrassed to tell you that I'm a moderate on this issue. The idea that I somehow don't trust women to make their own reproductive choices, I think, is sort of a spurious argument that we've heard a lot of in this campaign. But I do believe that we shouldn't be, particularly in the economic circumstances we find ourselves in this state, providing government funding for elective abortions. I also think, and this is something I never expected to take arrows from, but I've taken a lot of them, I don't believe that we should allow clinics, outpatient clinics that provide terminations, I don't think we should allow them to exist under more lax safety standards than surgical centers. In fact, when I ask physicians if they even knew that, most physicians are pretty surprised that in Illinois, clinics that provide abortions don't have to meet the same standards as surgical centers. I also believe that we shouldn't be allowing very late-term abortions, except in the case of the life or the health of the mother. So, you know, as a moderate, I can tell you, you know you're on a right path down the middle when you take arrows from both sides, and you know, hopefully the bleeding isn't showing through my white shirt.
Thank you. Mr. Drury.
I am pro-choice. I am supported and endorsed by Planned Parenthood and Personal PAC. I'm looking right now at the questionnaire that was turned into the League of Women Voters, and it says, what is your position on a woman's right to choose? Mine says I'm pro-choice and has a lengthy explanation of why I'm pro-choice. Mr. Shaw says response not submitted. It's scary if you're a woman in the 58th district, if you're a wife, if you're a daughter, to know that there's a person who can sit up here and not really tell you whether he's pro-choice or not, because you have to make decisions about your family and your health care. And it's offensive that in this day and age, people think that women don't have the right to make their own decisions. That's reactionary. I'm against it. I'm offended by it. And I will defend at all points in time a woman's right to choose and a woman's access to health care.
Thank you. The next question will be first answered by Ms. Morrison. Workers' compensation costs in Illinois are terrible. Do you support fixing them yet again?
I'd like to use a couple seconds just to respond to Dr. Friedman and let you know that I believe that full access to women's reproductive health care should not be based upon a woman's socioeconomic status. Poor women deserve the same right to that health care as any other woman. Workmen's compensation. We've begun some reforms. It's obviously something that needs to be part of a greater conversation. We need to make sure that businesses and employers are at the table and are making contributions that impact what happens in terms of developing and encouraging more employment and businesses here.
I'll call out Steve Sadin over here. He and I were walking not too many months ago, and he was interviewing me for a story, and we came across the owner of Chicago Mattress. We started talking to him about what his concerns were in Illinois, and one of the first things he brought up was workers' compensation. And he's not planning to move, but he had done some pricing of workers' compensation plans in other areas. And Steve, you can correct me if I have the numbers wrong. His premium at his factory is about $267,000 a year. And in Indiana, they would have been $60,000 to $70,000 a year. So, you know, when you talk about bringing businesses back to Illinois, there's very significant reforms we still need to undertake in workers' comp. It's one of the first concerns that business owners have. And the most important thing we can do is causation. Frankly, in Illinois, saying that only 1% of your injury needs to occur on the job for you to get workers' compensation, that's not acceptable if we want to have a business-friendly environment. And that's the primary reform not only I believe in, but the Illinois State Medical Society believes in as well.
Thank you. Go ahead.
When it comes to workers' compensation, we have to acknowledge what's been done and what needs to be done. Illinois has made great strides in workers' compensation reform. I, too, have been endorsed by the Illinois State Medical Society, an organization that historically endorses Republican candidates, because they understand that I'm serious about the issues facing the medical industry. Moving forward on workers' compensation, it's not just an issue of workers' compensation. When you talk to businesses, they feel that there is just absolutely no certainty in the future for Illinois, for them. All they see is that's certain today is that there will be a tax increase tomorrow. Illinois needs to get its fiscal house in order. It needs to make the tough choices. It needs to have truthful, honest, balanced budgets. Budgets that don't hide money in next year's budget. Budgets that don't sweep money from hidden funds. And then it needs to actually present a balanced budget to you, to me, and to the rest of the public. And when it does that, we can bring everybody to the table and talk about all of these reforms that need to be made. But to talk about it in a black hole is simply like putting a Band-Aid on cancer. It's not going to heal the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw.
I'd like to take just a few seconds to respond to the accusation that I didn't submit a questionnaire, an answers to questionnaires to legal and voters. I did. I sent them as Grant. I don't know why Mr. Drury suggests that it's not been turned into legal and voters, and I wish someone had told me if it didn't get received. Moving on to workers' compensation, as a small business person, I deal with workers' compensation issues every day. I deal with the rising costs of insurance for having to insure my employees. I understand what it means to have to be able to deal with employees that are injured on the job, and as a pharmacist I see those types of people all the time when I was practicing in my pharmacy, coming in and not having good access to care. One of the things that concerns me is Mr. Drury would have you believe that somehow he thinks that we need, that he's the champion now of better workers' compensation because he says he's endorsed by the Illinois State Medical Society. Well, what he forgets to tell you is that he's heavily funded by the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association, and I think we all know what they're about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is Dr. Friedman will be first in answering it. The winners on this stage will be voting on the redistribution of wealth to locals, i.e. local sales tax reappropriation. Most municipalities will lose $2 to $7 million. Will you vote yes or no?
Well, I would vote no, meaning I would vote against that, rescission of the personal property replacement tax. So just to give you a little bit of background, it's sort of an obscure point. When we got a new constitution in 1970, the ability of local municipalities to tax citizens was outlawed. In order to replace that local income tax, the state established a tax on businesses and used that money. It's called the personal replacement tax, and have now put that money towards the local municipalities. Recently, and I had a conversation with my mayor, Nancy Rodering in Highland Park. Recently, there was a move in the State House down in Springfield to move that money back to the state to help pay for pensions. And it's exactly the same situation about shifting pensions to property tax. I'm strongly opposed to that.
Go ahead.
Is it to me?
Yes.
I don't believe that we should have the personal property replacement tax shifted or taken away from the local municipalities. Again, the state needs to get its fiscal house in order before it starts using budgeting gimmicks to make it look like the budget is balanced. My campaign has built a foundation on this theme. Illinois does not need to be in the business of saying we've increased the cigarette tax by $1, we're in good shape. We're going to build 40 more casinos, we're in good shape. Illinois needs to tackle its problem in its own house before it starts taking away and shifting funds to get its budget balanced. And the only way to do that is to have truthful, honest, balanced budgets and get rid of all the political gimmicks that are going down in Springfield. As a prosecutor, I worked in complex financial crimes. I did forensic audits. I saw where people hide money. I can go down to Springfield, I can look at Springfield's books, and I can tell you, even from what I've seen, that if Illinois was a private company and I was still at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we'd be investigating Illinois. That's how bad it is right now, and I want to put an end to it.
Go ahead.
Just like I don't support a shifting of the teachers' retirement system debts to our local school districts, which will result in an increase in our local property taxes, I don't support a shifting of the personal property replacement tax receipts to the state of Illinois. I'm glad to hear that Mr. Drury says that he's not in favor of budget gimmicks. The shifting of the teachers' retirement liabilities to the local school districts is just such a gimmick that his patron and sponsor, Mike Madigan, has advocated. Mr. Drury would have you believe that somehow if the state of Illinois is able to shift those liabilities to our local school districts, they'll now have more funds so that they could fund education. What kind of circular logic is that? If we have enough money to fund education, why don't we just fund the pensions and not shift it back to our local property tax holders?
Thank you. The next question.
Can I answer?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can she answer?
I'm sorry. I checked you off knowing you were next.
That's okay. I'm probably the only one at the table that actually gets those checks from the state on a regular basis. The personal property replacement tax is a small but important part of the revenue that comes into our local governments. I don't think it's right. I know that we're able to use that very effectively to keep our tax rate low, to balance our budget, to do those very essential services that people require, that are statutorily required in some cases. I think to pull the rug out from underneath our local governments because the state can't take care of its own budget mess is wrong. Thank you.
Okay. The next question, Mr. Drury will be first. We have quite a few questions on charter schools and vouchers system. So I'm going to combine those and ask you to give us your viewpoint on both, and should it be easier to form both, and should the state fund a voucher system?
When it comes to education in Illinois, I'm a product of the local public school system in Highland Park. My kids attend the local public school system, and I wouldn't be sitting up here today telling you about everything I've accomplished in my career if it wasn't for those school teachers who taught me. The public school system in some areas is failing its children, and I believe that one way to correct that is to let a vibrant charter school system compete in the public arena, so that the public school system can take some of the ideas that develop in the incubator that are charter schools, and we can bring them over to the public schools and improve public education. I am absolutely against vouchers. Vouchers will decimate our public education system, and I know Mr. Shaw and I disagree on this point. If people want to send their kids to private schools, they absolutely have the right to do that. I have friends who do that. But we should not be taking money out of the public education system, starving the public education system even more, and failing and not doing our job to educate whole segments of our society. It's immoral.
Excuse me, I support giving people the right to choose where they want to send their children for school. I'm a product of the public education system in the state of Illinois myself. My parents are both retired school teachers. I grew up in deep southern Illinois where the amount of funding that we have for education is pitiful. It would have been nice if we had been able to have some kind of choice in our education in poor areas of this state as well as in this northern part of Illinois, in particular the south side of Chicago. The fact that Mr. Drury can afford to send his kids to private schools if he chooses to do so says nothing to the thousands of families out there that don't have those kinds of resources and are trapped in a failing system because the teachers union in Illinois continues to control the products that we receive from our education. I understand why Mr. Drury would feel that way, given that he's been supported by a number of teachers union organizations and of course his patron Mike Madigan.
Ms. Madigan and Ms. Morrison?
Excellent schools is one of the reasons that my husband and I decided to live in Deerfield and in the 29th district, and I would bet it's an important factor for a lot of us who are residents to have excellent schools. That being said, charter schools do have a place. It is an incubator, as Scott said. It's a place to think outside the box, to try different approaches, to teach in different ways, to try to reach some children and students that are harder to educate, maybe that have less resources. The number of charter schools shouldn't be increased until we have really 100% successful charter schools already in place. And the money that funds them should not be any greater nor any less than any other public school. Otherwise, we're comparing apples and oranges. And I am against the voucher system. We can't take money out of our public schools to fund private schools. It would decimate our public schools.
Scott, you go to Highland Park High School? Highland Park High School?
I
Yeah,
did.
so it's a reunion up here to some degree. You know, my wife and I are both graduates of Highland Park High School, and we have a great public school system in most of the district here. But if you want an example of how charter schools are important, all you have to do is go just a couple of miles that way to North Chicago. Some of the worst schools in the Chicagoland area are within the 29th district. We overlap the North Chicago school system. And I sat in a meeting not too many months ago where residents of the community were essentially begging their school board to have a charter school. We also have the Navy base, which is eagerly awaiting the start of a charter school there as well. The idea of having vouchers for those areas that even a charter school can't provide an adequate education to is not a Republican idea. It actually was originated with Reverend Meeks, who was a state senator from the south side of Chicago. And I do believe that in a very limited set of schools that have completely failed, and there doesn't seem to be the prospect of a charter school to save those kids, that we owe it to these fellow citizens to provide them a different alternative.
All right, the next question, Mr. Shaw will begin, and we've had several questions in this area. Illinois has more bodies of government than any other state. So first, how would you go about fixing this, and would part of your fix be supporting combining small school districts?
Yes, we do have more governmental bodies than just about any other state in the nation. And one of the areas that we have that is somewhat duplicative in certain parts of the state, in particular in the more congested areas like in northern Illinois, is township government versus municipal government. For example, in West Deerfield Township, where I live, we have a township government for a small section of society, when in fact we have a number of municipalities that provide an awful lot of support for their communities. So we need to take a look and see where we have duplication of efforts and where we have redundancies. As far as consolidating smaller school districts, obviously that's something that needs to be looked at. However, it needs to be looked at taking into consideration the needs of the local communities. Being from Southern Illinois and seeing small communities lose their school districts and see those towns dry up and blow away, I'm extremely sensitive to trying to pull school districts out of small communities because I know what kind of perils that leads to in those communities.
Thank you.
There was a bipartisan commission set up this spring through legislation that is supposed to report in December, and they're looking at just that. All the local units of government, everything from your library to your school district to townships, mosquito abatement districts, everybody's on the chopping board. And you know what? They should be. And we should start at the very top. Combine our Treasury, our Department of the Treasury and our Comptroller's Office. That's $13 million right there we save just in administration every year. Township government, Mr. Shaw may not know all the services we actually do and that are some statutorily required. And what I would say to him and to each one of you is that if the different municipalities would like to come in, take over those services, I will tell you they can't do them as efficiently or as effectively or as personally as we can, but if they can in fact serve you, I'll give you the keys to the building this afternoon. What we do is efficient and effective.
Thank you. Dr. Friedman.
Look, I mean, everybody knows that local governments in Illinois are essentially anonymous and invisible. Does anybody here know who's on the sanitary district board, for example? Just a couple. Do you? Are you on it? Right. And I do believe that that prevents transparency in government. But I don't believe that these decisions should be made from the top down. There's real barriers to consolidating and eliminating small governmental bodies. Evanston Township just tried to dissolve itself fairly recently, and I have to tell you it was a gargantuan task. So what I'm in favor of is lowering the barriers for local communities to get ballot initiatives and effectively combine and eliminate units of government. And I think the electoral process is really the means by which all of us who live in those areas can vet whether or not these are useful bodies of government or whether duplicative, or whether they should be eliminated altogether.
Okay, Mr. Drury.
Illinois has too much government. Just look at your tax bill. The blue letter came in the mail not too long ago, and you made the second payment just back on September 6th. I live in Highwood. We're about 2 miles big, and we have 16 different taxing bodies for our town. 16. And there's people, I actually know some people in the sanitary district know the names, but I don't know who's on my mosquito abatement district. There's just too much government, and we need to look at it. When people talk about common sense plans to reduce property taxes, the only common sense plan to reduce your property taxes is actually to reduce the number of units that you're being taxed for. And whether that's township, whether it's mosquito abatement, whether it's your local government, whether it's consolidating a bunch of services, that needs to be done, and that's a real solution to property tax. Just freezing your property taxes in their place, like Mr. Shaw wants to do, would be the largest unfunded mandate in the history of Illinois. It would get rid of your education system, which is good because he wants vouchers, and it would get rid of our police, which is good because he wants to arm everybody.
Thank you. Oh, come on. Thank you. The next question goes to Ms. Morrison.
Okay.
Ms. Morrison will take the next question. Would you have voted for the increase in the state income tax for individuals from 3% to 5% and corporations from 4.8% to 7.2%?
Easy question, easy answer. No, I would not have. That being said, it happened. And it's been put in place as a temporary measure to give us some time to get our financial and our fiscal house in order. If I go to Springfield, I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure that that temporary tax increase is just that, temporary, as it was intended to be.
Not only would I have voted against it, but I will take the soonest opportunity to vote to repeal it. But let's be clear. This money, which was sold to us as a way of paying down our debt and covering governmental responsibilities, in the end largely went to pay for our out-of-control pension system. So the flip side to repealing the income tax is that we aggressively, comprehensively, and fairly reform our pension system. Those two together, as well as some reforms in Medicaid, because Medicaid is going to need further dramatic reform to provide better quality of care for less cost, I believe will allow us to repeal the tax increase and send a message to the nation and the world that Illinois is really open for business.
I would not have voted for the tax increase. That tax increase was voted on because it was a quote-unquote emergency that needed to be done. I worked at a law firm as a young associate, and you would hand in a project about 4 weeks before it was due, and you would ask the partner every day, have you looked at my project, have you looked at the paper yet? 5 minutes before it was due, he would look at it and say, it's an emergency, we got to fix it. That's what happened in Illinois. It creates its own emergencies, and it should have never been there. Illinois now has made a promise to the public it would be a temporary tax increase, and if Illinois wants any credibility in government, it needs to do everything it can to roll back that tax increase on schedule and on time, and I'm committed to doing that.
I too would have voted no on the so-called temporary income tax increase, and furthermore, I don't believe that the people that support that particular legislation intend for it to be temporary. The last time we had a temporary income tax increase, we went from 2.5% to 3%. That didn't get rolled back. That became permanent. We were told whenever we created toll roads that once we paid off the roads, the tolls would go away. I don't recall being able to drive on our toll roads free of charge anymore. So I think what you can see is that you can't count on government to do what they say they're going to do. As far as freezing our property taxes, as Mr. Drury talked about, what Mr. Drury doesn't understand is that the more money you give government, the more they will spend. In fact, they will spend more than they have. The way government funds things is they tell you how much money they want to spend, and then they ask the tax assessor to come up with the revenues from the people. With all of our houses now in this area being severely undervalued and many of them underwater, the last thing we need to do is to have our taxes go up when our property values go down. Thank you.
I think that this will be the last question before, I'm sorry, Ms. Morrison, did you answer?
She was first.
You answered first, okay. This will be probably the last question before we go to closing statements. Since all of you would have voted against the tax increase, how will you ensure that Illinois doesn't go bankrupt? And we will start with Dr. Friedman.
Sure. If you look at Illinois' budget over the last several years, there are two large consumers of resources that have essentially begun to squeeze everything else out. I'll agree with Governor Quinn about one thing. The reality is if you exclude Medicaid and pensions from the conversation, government has shrunk in Illinois. Last year we cut $350 million from education, from preschool through higher education. We cut money for public safety. Illinois right now has the dishonor of funding developmental services. We are 51st out of 50 states in funding developmental services, behind even Washington, D.C. So we have to reform these two programs. Heroic work was done in Medicaid last session to prevent a massive crisis. But the reality is there's a lot more work to be done there, and we absolutely must take seriously the need to do comprehensive pension reform to get Illinois' finances back on track.
Thank you.
The question is, how do we prevent Illinois from going bankrupt? Unfortunately, if Illinois was a company, Illinois has been bankrupt for quite a while. Illinois' liabilities outpace its revenue by about $9 billion every year. The way that needs to be fixed is twofold, and one the state has already begun taking steps towards implementing, which is called the performance-based budgeting, which means that we don't just say our budget last year was X amount of dollars, this year we'll spend X plus 5% and just dole out the money. We start out at zero and have every agency come in and try to justify why they're getting money. Now, along with that, Illinois needs to have these truthful, honest budgets. Illinois can no longer have budgeting gimmicks. It can't hide $3 billion of Medicaid in next year's budget right from the start. It can't sweep funds from these hidden funds that we don't see and say we're balanced. It's like taking your credit card to pay off your credit card and thinking you're in good financial shape. If we can get these two things done, then Illinois can get out of the hole it's in. And for my kids and everyone who has kids and grandkids in this room, Illinois can be the example of how a state gets out of a mess.
The type of budgeting that Mr. Drury talks about is also known as zero-based budgeting, which I actually support. Zero-based budgeting requires agencies essentially every year to justify every dollar they're receiving for the next fiscal year. It doesn't permit them to merely only have to explain why they need an increase in their budget. They have to explain why they should get what they got last year and then explain why they should get more. As far as budget gimmicks, the property tax shift to the local school districts that Mr. Madigan and Mr. Drury support is just an example of a budget gimmick that we cannot afford. As far as cutting the expenditures in the state of Illinois, if we go to a zero-based budgeting type thing, unlike the type that Mr. Drury talks about, which is rarely enforced and rarely utilized, I think we will see more conscientious thought put into our budgeting process. If we can get the pensions under control, which is probably the biggest thing that drives our budget deficits, that will also help us reduce our unfunded budgets that we currently operate under.
Thank you.
The easiest way to get out of the hole is to quit digging it. So we need to reform Medicaid. Arie's right on that. We need to continue, and we need to make sure that our pension reform actually happens and takes place. But besides that, there's so many other things we can do. We can rebid contracts. The state of Illinois has hundreds of contracts. Every opportunity should be given to rebid those. Competitive bidding, at least in my experience at the township, has really saved us a lot of money. It's a great way to save money for the state too, and it needs to be transparent, which again will make us, brings integrity back to the state. Let's do an audit of every agency to make sure everyone who sits at a desk and takes a paycheck from the state of Illinois is actually working to its fullest capacity and is being paid the appropriate amount of money. It's time for Illinois to sit up straight, tighten its belt like the rest of us do.
Thank you. Now we are going to closing statements, and I want to thank everyone for their questions, and sorry we didn't get to more. We'll start with the state Senate candidates, and Ms. Morrison is going first for the closing statement.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for doing this, for promoting it and giving us an opportunity to talk to so many voters at once. I'm very proud to be the Democratic candidate who will be a full-time legislator, who will be accessible to you so that we can talk about your ideas for making the state government work for you again. I'm someone who has experience, who has leadership skills, who actually has worked in a bipartisan way for 16 years, and someone who shares the values of the 29th District in choice, in gun control, in preserving human services, and looking out for our seniors. Those are obligations that we have and that we care about. This state needs a revamp for its business climate. I'll do whatever I can to promote that. How many underemployed people do you know? How many graduates of school do you know, new graduates, that can't find a job? Those are the people that we're going to work for. And I promise you that I will work very hard for you if given the opportunity. Thank you.
Dr. Friedman.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. This has been a tremendous honor for me to be the Republican candidate for state Senate. Public service has been an important part of my life. I wear the Navy colors on my tie, my aviator wings, because the honor of being involved in public service is something that's meant a lot to me throughout my life. So again, thank you very much. You know, everybody I think in this room has a sense that Illinois is on the wrong track. Economically, we are doing far less well than we should. We have a 9.1% unemployment rate. We have some of the worst indebtedness in the country. We have a pension system that looks to steamroll the entire economy going forward. And the reality is the only way we get out of this is to start choosing new leaders. One of the first votes that any of us up here are going to cast is for who leads the body that we're going to be in, whether it be here in the state Senate or whether it's over there for the House. My vote will be for different leadership. My vote will be against John Cullerton, who's the current state Senate president. And that's the start of getting Illinois back on track. We have a tremendous amount of work to do to get Illinois' business climate back to where it should be so that families can count on their children coming back to Illinois to live their lives and raise their families. But that's the start. We as citizens are responsible to send the message to the rest of the country that Illinois takes the concerns of business, the concerns of our economists seriously, and I'll be a vote for that in the state Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. You may applaud now. All right. And now we'll go to the House candidates. And Mr. Shaw has the first closing statement.
I'd like to begin by thanking, thanking the League for sponsoring this debate along with the Patch and the Union League Club, and I'd like to thank all the voters that came here today to listen to us and to answer or to ask us questions for us to answer. Each of you have a lot of concerns, and that's why you're here. You have an interest in your community and your state. You heard each of us and what our views and visions are for the state of Illinois. So now you have to decide what vision for Illinois that you would like for each of us to do if we're successful in our election to fulfill those views. Do you want to turn over more of your hard-earned money to career politicians who have shown that they are capable of spending more than they even have? Do you want your most valuable, one of your most valuable assets, your home, to be devalued by increasing property taxes? And do you want your livelihoods to be jeopardized by fiscally irresponsible career politicians that are running jobs out of the state of Illinois? If, like me, you don't want any of these kinds of things to happen, then I think the choice is clear. Dr. Friedman pointed out that he won't be voting for John Cullerton. I, too, will not be voting for the current Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, if I'm elected to the State House. Mike Madigan has been in Springfield for 41 years. I'm 51 years old. He went down there when I was 11. I have an 11-year-old son. I hope my son is not 51 years old before Mike Madigan is retired. He exercises one-man rule in Springfield, not one-party rule. We must get rid of Mr. Madigan. I will. Mr. Drury will not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Drury. Mr. Drury. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the League. Thank you all for coming today. Listen, Illinois is broke and broken. And we can put an end to that, and we can usher in a new era of government in Illinois. And my candidacy offers us that opportunity. I'm the only one in this race, actually, who's not a career politician. This is my first time running for office. I've spent my public service actually trying to make your homes and your streets safer, your communities safer, taking sex predators off our streets, taking guns off our streets, fighting corruption. We are only going to usher in this new era of government if we're committed to a vision for Illinois. And it's not a vision of negativity. It's a vision of opportunity. It's a vision for my son and my daughter who are sitting here with us today. Where is this state going to be when they grow up? When they graduate from colleges, there are going to be opportunity for them to work and live in this state and raise their families here. The vision that I offer provides that opportunity for Dylan and Eden, and for all of your Dylan and Edens. There is a big contrast between Mr. Shaw and I. I know that the state can move forward if we have thoughtful decisions, if we take the time not just to go up to brick walls and say we can't do something, but we go through brick walls, we go around brick walls, and we come up with the opportunities that all of us want for our families. Together, we can usher in this new era of government in Illinois. I know we can. We just have to elect good people to do it. And my background, when you check the facts, will show that I am just the person to do that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, and thank you to the candidates and to the sponsors, Patch, the Union League, and the League of Women Voters. And there's one more candidate form. Don't go away. In 10 minutes, you'll be able to hear the county board candidates.
Candidates for the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 21st districts. I'm Paula Lawson. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Glencoe, so I live in Cook County, not Lake County, and I'm also a former State League president. At this time, I would like to invite Mike Rummel, the candidate for Lake County Board in the 12th District, to make a statement. Mr. Rummel is unopposed in the 12th District, and under the debate rules, an unopposed candidate may make a 2-minute statement and may not answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm Mike Rummel. I'm running from a candidate for the 12th District, and unlike my opponents up there, I don't get to hide my notes behind my name tag, so I'm sorry I have them with me. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this forum. It's really important for residents and voters to get to see candidates, and I believe this forum offers a chance for them to do that. So thank you to them, and I also want to thank the League for allowing me to speak. While I do not have an opponent, I'm going to be able to introduce myself to you and just let you know that I am out there for you to contact me on important issues that are happening within the county. The county is an important area. A number of people don't realize that we're the 3rd largest county in Illinois. Our budget is over $487 million. If we were a state, we'd be the 5th smallest state in the United States. We're bigger than 5 other states. And your property tax bill, your local tax bill, 15 to 20% of your local tax dollars go to the county. What services do the county offer? Well, for police and fire, we are the police and fire when they're not in a municipality. We also run the forest reserve, the court system, and one other the roads. So those are the things that we run, and that's what our budget goes for county-wide. There are a number of important issues facing the county today. The board is responsible for the sheriff, and we have to keep that department going. There is the Route 53, the revitalization of the Winchester House, the rebuilding of the court system, and trying to keep efficiencies in government, and of course, economic development and having shovel-ready projects for the county. As former mayor of Lake Forest, I know what it is to be accessible to the residents and to make tough decisions and produce results. I will bring that tenacity to the county board on behalf of the residents of the 12th District. We must do more to support Lake County businesses as well as those that are potentially looking to bring their businesses to our county in order to maintain and create efficient job, hardworking citizens. In addition, we must make county governing more efficient and more prices available to everyone. So finally, keeping our AAA rating is important. Thank you. Please contact me at mikerummel.com.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rummel. Okay, get this in here. All right, now I just like to remind people to turn off all cell phones, and please hold your applause till the end of the debate. The debates are being taped by Lake Forest TV, and unauthorized videos are not allowed. Each candidate signed an agreement that forbids the editing or use of footage for campaign advertising. Each candidate has 1.5 minutes for both the opening and closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer a question. Audience members may submit questions on cards provided by the ushers. The cards will be collected throughout the debate. Please do not address your question to a single candidate. League members will review the questions to eliminate duplication or combine similar questions. Due to time limitations, not all questions may be asked. Candidate statements will be timed. League members will keep time and display count cards visible to candidates and the moderator. Okay, exchanges between candidates will be ruled out of order. The candidates do lots before the debate to decide who would do the first opening statements. And so for District 11, we will be having Lauren Lambrecht. Oh, I should introduce this. I didn't introduce everything. I should introduce the candidates first. The Lake County 11th District candidates are Mr. Steve Mandel and Ms. Lauren Lambrecht. The 21st District candidates are Ms. Arlene Hickory and Ms. Ann Maine. And the 13th District candidates are Ms. Sandra Hart and Mr. David Barkhausen. Okay, now let's go to opening statements, and we'll have Ms. Lambrecht first.
Hi, I'm Laura Lambrecht. I came to the county in 1970. It's weird hearing your voice echo. I have a BS in physics, 16 years Fortune 100 experience, The last 12 years, well, the last 16 years I've been working, well, Fortune 100 experience, but the last 12 years I've been working for AT&T, basically a communications company where we do a lot of, you know, I've worked side by side with the, you know, network folks, the mobility, all of that, and we also have to, we as a company have to create our own power in case of catastrophic whatever. All of these things are kind of do transfer to the county pretty well. So I went to my first meeting and there were like 4 issues that I could help with. And I also happen to know about 911 public safety issues as a result of working at AT&T. So I do think that my skill set is pretty strong for this effort, and I'm very good with a dollar. I'm always very, even in my workplace, we have to be clever with spending money and finding synergies and making, yeah, okay, well, I'm very good with a dollar, and I always find ways of saving money, and I'm tired of our taxes being an upward trajectory all the time. So hopefully I can, if I'm given the opportunity, I can help stop that.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect timing.
Mr. Mandel, you're next with the opening statement.
Thank you. My name is Steve Mandel, and I am asking you to vote for me for the Lake County Board, District 11. I was raised in Highland Park, married a great lady who graduated from Highland Park High School, and we have raised our 2 children here in Lake County. I wish to bring my municipal government experience to the Lake County level where I know I can make a difference. I will promote government efficiencies, which include a dialogue with the state and others to work on shared services, government consolidations, and outsourcing to lower the overall cost of government. I will continue my environmental leadership, enhancing recycling, using high-efficiency vehicles, protecting clean water, Lake Michigan, and the air we breathe. I will continue my availability to residents to problem solve and to promote government transparency that I have demonstrated over my many years of public service. As a councilman and mayor pro tem of the city of Highland Park, I have shown leadership that has reduced our share of property taxes in half. We have reached a AAA credit rating. We have partnered with sister governments to dedicate more open space, significantly reduce stormwater and sewer outflow damages, partnered with governments and private businesses to bring reduced costs while providing quality services to our residents. As your county board member, I will bring this knowledge and experience to Lake County, and I ask for your vote.
Okay, thank you. The next opening statement is Ms. Maine.
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and thank you to all of you for staying here to the bitter end. We appreciate it. My name is Ann Maine. I have had the privilege of being on the Lake County Board for the past 10 years. My husband and I have raised our 4 sons in Lincolnshire. It's been 20 years, hard to believe that. I have a PhD in biochemistry, and for the past 19 years I've been on the faculty at Lake Forest College where I teach biology. I was a trustee in the village of Lincolnshire for almost 6 years, and as I said, about 10 years ago I was elected to the Lake County Board. It's really been my honor to serve the residents of District 21. It's been an interesting 10 years. For the first 4 years or so, it was still the boom times, and then for the last half, it's been a struggle. It's been a great struggle for our country, and it's been a struggle for Lake County. But a constant throughout those 10 years has been my commitment to take the time to learn about the issues, to meet with the residents, to work on their behalf, to work with other governmental agencies to try to solve these problems. Another constant has been the financial stability of Lake County government in the Forest Preserve District. The last debate you heard everyone up here say, Illinois is broken. Well, I'm proud to say that Lake County is not broken. We still have improvement. But there's 2 main reasons for this. First is our overarching approach has been to not spend money we don't have and to make sure that one-time monies are not spent on operating costs. And secondly, when times are difficult, we make the hard decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. The next statement is Ms. Hickory's.
Hello. Appreciate being here. I have lived in Lake County since 1976. I graduated from Loyola University with a bachelor's degree in nursing, and from the University of Illinois with a master's degree in nursing. I taught 3 years at the University of Illinois. I was employed by the North Chicago Veterans Administration for 24 years. I was part of a team to develop one of the first programs to treat Vietnam veterans suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and worked in that program for most of those years. My work with combat veterans gave me a deep insight into the dynamic of war. The Iraq War and another stream of veterans suffering from war trauma convinced me that conditions were becoming critical, and this led to my desire to advocate for peace and protection of the environment. I'm prepared to advocate for peace and for protection of the environment, for governance that places people and environment over money and profit, and protect the county from privatization of resources and deregulation that produces protection of our health and workers' rights. I want to increase citizen involvement in governance by urging investing in internet technology that accesses cloud sourcing, creating highly interactive citizen government collaboration. I want to explore innovative approaches to financial economic challenges, perhaps a county public bank, following in the footsteps of the state with their House Bill 2064 for a public state bank. I believe this next decade is going to be an important moment in our history.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hart is next.
Hi, my name is Sandy Hart, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for this event and to all of you for sticking it out. A little bit about me. I have a BA and an MBA, and I will bring a strong background in business and community service to the board. I worked at Kraft Foods for over 13 years, managing a $37 million business and developing strong analytical skills. I also worked at the assessor's office and earned a CIAO, giving me important expertise to address our property assessment practices and its tax implications. I serve as the vice president on the Lake Bluff Park District Board, and I'm on the Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital Women's Board. I've been married to my husband Tom for 14 years, and we have 3 children. I have 3 priorities for the board. First, I will work with Lake County businesses so that we remain competitive and stop the flow of jobs over the border. We must ensure that we attract and retain companies, providing jobs and a critical tax base. Second, financial accountability and transparency is crucial. Taxpayer dollars must be spent effectively. As I've gone door to door, I've talked to hundreds of taxpayers who are understandably upset that their home values have decreased and yet taxes increase, and we must alleviate the tax burden. Third, I am committed to the preservation and continuation of open space policies. I'm honored to have the support of Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, and I look forward to representing Lake Bluff and the rest of the district on the county board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And for the last opening statement, Mr. Barkhausen.
Thank you all for this rare opportunity to have an exchange of views about our candidacies and the future of Lake County. Let me suggest 5 reasons for supporting my candidacy. First is broad, relevant experience in the state legislature as a Lake Bluff Village trustee with Shields Township government and as an attorney and financial professional. Second is a prior familiarity with all of this new and diverse district that stretches from Lake Bluff to Grays Lake, based on having served all of it in the legislature, along with about 70% of all of Lake County. Third is a clear track record of looking out for taxpayers' interests, most recently helping to achieve a AAA credit rating for Lake Bluff while chairing its finance committee during a time of declining revenues, and working with the Shields Township trustees to reduce the township's property tax by 30%. Fourth is an extensive involvement with a variety of public and private conservation activities that relate to a county board member's significant role in governing the Lake County Forest Preserve District. Fifth and finally is what I think is a strong overall record of accomplishment in all prior positions and a very detailed vision for county government set forth with great specifics on my campaign website, barkhausenforlakecounty.com. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, now to the questions, and we'll start with Mr. Mandel. What are your views on the runaway road construction and sprawl in Lake County in terms of cost and natural resources?
Well, I actually think the county has done a pretty good job in controlling sprawl throughout the county. My view is that we should not have sprawl. My view is that we should focus on looking at our urbanized areas that are along our transportational networks to see about redevelopment, finding incentives, the way to get businesses to promote jobs for people, and to focus on resources where they're there instead of having to go into native lands on creating new resources, new water lines, new sewer lines, new streets. So Overall, I would continue the philosophy that the current board has worked on, and that's being very, very careful, very environmentally friendly, and focusing on urban redevelopment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lambrecht?
Yeah, I do say, I mean, I do have to agree that the county has done a good job of taking care of the sprawl, and they are sensitive to the environmental issues, because we cannot really, we cannot affect them, because that would cause long-term ramifications. So I would agree that they seem to be doing a good job, and let's hope they continue to do so.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hickory?
Okay, I'm going to add approval as well. This, I think, would speak to my concern about having a high citizen involvement and collaboration between citizens and government, because I think they need to know what are the choices, what are the decisions that need to be made when development does get out of hand, and to understand what parts of the community are more open for development and what parts of the community should be preserved and conserved.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Maine?
Well, thank you. As the only incumbent up here, I appreciate that you feel that we're doing a good job. I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind when we talk about sprawl is that in Illinois, counties are weak and municipalities are strong. And so often when we talk about sprawl, you need to understand that municipalities can annex and do their own development, and that in fact, most times the county cannot control what a municipality is doing. That being said, in the past 10 years, I think the county's made great strides in making strong cooperation with our municipal partners so that we can work together on these issues. Because keep in mind, when the economy comes back, and we all hope that it does, we're going to see another push on development. What's important is that the county board is committed to our Complete Streets program, in which we are incorporating sidewalks, bike paths, and alternative ways for people to get around the county. And in addition, in the past 10 years in the Forest Preserve, we have preserved over 6,000 acres. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hart?
I'm going to just speak to the sustainable growth patterns that I think are so necessary for us here in Lake County. Sprawl is an issue everywhere, and many times when people move into Lake County, they are looking for a more rural environment, particularly as we go quite far west. Sustainable growth patterns begin with having a vision for the future and making sure the desire of surrounding communities are met. And the county needs to look at low impact development practices to determine best practices in planning, building, and zoning. And we need to understand, does the infrastructure support the development? What is the long-term impact of any development or roads in terms of traffic, property values, and again, sprawl, water needs, future development? These decisions impact the county well into the future, and I'll be working full-time to ensure that every avenue is evaluated in the best interests of our residents.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barkhausen?
The question seemed to suggest that, that road construction had somehow been excessive, and really the problem has been that the development has preceded the planning for adequate transportation. The county is fortunately catching up with some of these things. The widening of Milwaukee Avenue is a significant example of that. And another is what I think of as a model proposal for widening Route 120 and building Route 53 in an environmentally sensitive way as a result of the recent recommendations of the so-called Blue Ribbon Commission that were issued last spring, and which we're now under review and making progress through the Illinois Tollway Authority. I think this is a model for how transportation should work in the future, and something we should all look to as an example in the future.
Okay, thank you. This next question will go to Ms. Lambrecht first. 80% of Moraine Township wants an open primary. What are each of your opinions on changing Illinois to an open primary?
When you mean open primary, like everybody should have, what
Right,
do you mean by
you
open
should be
primary?
able to, you know what, why don't we go to, there was also, let's go to a question that's kind of on this, maybe applies more to Lake County. Every 10 years, the various legislative district boundaries are redrawn and gerrymandered. Would you support a computerized system of redistricting? How would you make this reasonable and fair? And there was another question about Lake County.
I like that better. You know, it's, you know, I mean, it's kind of a shame that in some, like, I think it was Mundelein is divided up and you don't know whose state your representative or you have. And, you know, it's nice that at least District 11, at least we're Highland, Park-Highwood, and a tiny little sliver of Moraine Township. That's okay. I don't have an issue with that. But some of these other, you know, Dold's district, and, you know, it should be like, I think it should be maybe independent parties or parties, people from both groups making the decisions, because it's ridiculous that one party is going to decide and try to jerry-rig it so that they are in a better position. So, I mean, you know, let's try to keep our towns together, you know, and make it more cohesive.
Okay.
For the poor citizens.
I mean, they don't, the guy across the street could have somebody else. So, maybe some sort of cooperative group to do it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hickory on redistricting?
I don't have any strong opinions about redistricting.
Okay, next person, Ms. Maine.
Yeah, teacher voice. Ooh, sorry. I think that we could do it in a different way. I'm a little bit hesitant to say computerized sounds great, but I think what's important to keep in mind is that you need to create a model that the computer is going to use, and what the issue really is what is the data that is going in to create that model. One of the things that at the county board that was started with is there are federal laws that must be followed in creating districts that represent minorities, racial minorities, language minorities, and so these are the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind. So I think that could work quite well. I'm not opposed to that, but the devil is in the details, and I think you need to look at what those different parameters are going to be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hart?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think particularly for those of us in District 13, because this district extends from Lake Bluff out to essentially 120 and 45. It does not include the unincorporated areas, Knollwood, which is an unincorporated area of Lake Bluff, but does include the unincorporated area of Grace Lake. So there are certain concerns that I have with the district. However, I believe that it was done to the best of the ability of the people who had done it, keeping in mind making sure that minorities are fairly represented on the board. So whether a computer model is the answer, you might start with that and then just to have some manual impact over that, making sure needs are met.
Okay, Mr. Barkhausen.
I think the problem exists at the state level. The state, of course, the legislature does the redistricting for both legislative districts and congressional districts, and the league, to its credit, has long supported an independent bipartisan commission that would take the responsibility for doing this, as has been the law in many other states, such as Arizona and Iowa, for a period of time. And in fact, the Republicans had a proposal that they made, and not surprisingly, the Democratic majority in the legislature didn't want anything to do with it. So we're stuck for another 10 years at least, hopefully only another 10 years, with the unfortunate partisan system that we have.
Okay, and Mr. Mandel?
I haven't thought about it much, but it kind of reminds me of all the years I was on the Plan Commission working on land use and talking about subdivisions and looking for areas, minimum size lots. And people always wanted to take and put these little long peninsulas out, you know, very far to get the lot area. I think they should be more spherical. I think, you know, you shouldn't have a town like Deerfield that's in 3 county board districts. I think that's wrong. I think that you should look where population centers are centered and focus on that. I think maybe some kind of bipartisan approach, some type of model that demonstrates some type of cohesive, because there are groups, there are areas in the county, and I'll just speak to the county, that makes sense. I don't think it makes sense to have a district that starts on Lake Cook Road and goes 3/4 of the way up Lake County. So I think there's a better way of doing it. I haven't really thought about it a lot, but I'd be happy to sit on some group and try to work the issue. I think there's a better way.
Okay. The next question will go to Ms. Hickory first, and it is, do you favor rebuilding Winchester House?
At the primary, when I was at Forum for Lake County United, I said then that I was in favor of rebuilding Winchester House, and I still hold to that.
Okay. Next person, Ms. Maine.
Yes, I was on the Human Services Committee, and I voted for changing the staff levels, for developing an outside advisory committee, and for hiring the management group, HDG, to make Winchester House financially viable. And I'm really happy to say that we have had great success by having an outside management group take care of Winchester House, because frankly, the county didn't know how to do it. I think it serves as an excellent safety net. I'm in support of the current model that requires 55 to 70% of the beds to be for Medicaid patients. And during the tours we had in Wisconsin, there's a lot of resident-centered care approach that I really hope that we could work with our unions and get them to use that approach. So yes, as long as we can have Winchester House live within its levy, which is what the citizens voted for, I do support a new Winchester House.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hart?
I do support a new Winchester House. As baby boomers age, Lake County is getting older, and any projection shows that many of us would need skilled nursing care. The short-term view says that there are enough beds in private facilities for Medicaid patients. The long-term view shows that a private nursing home that would now accept Medicaid patients, more Medicaid patients, wouldn't need to do so in the future. The goal is for Winchester House to operate and cover debt service with user fees, Medicare, Medicaid, and stay within the approved levy of 2.5 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. Once we see the results of the recent privatization, then we can make sure that operations and debt service would be covered. And then we can think about building a new facility, perhaps smaller than the one we have today. We need to make sure we provide a safety net in a fiscally responsible manner for future generations of Lake County residents. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Barkhausen?
I have raised some questions about the wisdom of building a new $40 million Winchester House facility, primarily for the reason that today, and I think for the foreseeable future, there is adequate space in private nursing homes to care for those who need and are dependent on Medicaid that is otherwise supported by both the federal government and the state. If the patient, to the extent these patients are taken care of in a county subsidized nursing home, the county is also on the hook, and that's a significant amount of money, potentially outstripping the available revenues, and plus we'd have $40 million worth of debt service. I have been influenced, in my opinion, by the prior leadership of the prior director of the Lake County Health Department, a resident here in Lake Forest, who in fact opposed the county's what is currently their board support in leaning towards a new Winchester House, and he went on to head the Illinois Public Health Association. So it's a serious public health official who's taken this position, and I think we should look seriously at his view.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mandel?
Yes, I do support a new Winchester House. I think it has to live within the levy. Like all the other budgetary items, we can get it done. We are getting older. We might not need all the beds today, but we might need a lot more 10 years from now. And it's hard to go through a process like this overnight. So I think you have to look at it. I mean, one of the things that's going to decide which way we go is what the bids come in at. We just, in Highland Park, we just bid on a water plant. We started out thinking it was $19 million. We got bids close to $40 million. So, you know, I think you got to be flexible, but dealing with, you know, I've had one parent that's gone that went through not being able to take care of themselves, and you know, it's something we have to focus on. When people don't have the ability to do it themselves, we have to step up. That's the #1 priority, to take care of people that can't. And I am supportive.
Okay, and Ms. Lambrecht on Winchester House.
I too am supportive of the Winchester House, as long as it stays within the levy. I hear that we did save $1.6 million by privatizing it in 2011.
And that was a great way of finding savings and staying within budget. And I'm glad we have the safety net for people that need it.
Okay, and the next question goes to Ms. Maine first. Do you support the inclusion of incineration technologies in the county's solid waste plan? And if yes, would you support the siting of such a facility in your district?
No, so that means the second part is no. I do serve on the Public Works and Transportation Committee, which has oversight of solid waste. This is a serious issue. Our landfills are going to be filled up in the next 10 years, perhaps less than that. And it was a great example of citizen involvement when we were developing our new 5-year plan that we had some look at that. Citizens came, presented great information, and we really revised our plan. And we have we had businesses, citizens working together, and we have a new recycling plan. It's very aggressive, and I'm happy to say that I voted for the adoption, for the stronger approach, that we all need to take this issue seriously and look at other ways that we can deal with our solid waste. Incineration is just moving the problem from a landfill into our air, and we don't need to move the problem from one spot to another spot impacting our health. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hart?
I'll stay within my 1 minute, but I'm going to add something about Winchester House. I would just like to point out that the previous executive director, Mr. Galassi, who is a resident of Lake Forest, retired 5 years ago, and with all due respect, a lot can happen in 5 years. And by saying that these Medicaid patients can be cared for in private facilities with state and federal dollars makes it sound as though we don't pay federal and state dollars. So I think that's important that we're caring for these people. Regarding incineration, I am not in favor of incineration, and I am very familiar with the increased efforts of the county to recycle, and I attended that meeting, in fact, when they were deciding whether to approve or adopt the resolution of the increased recycling, and I am pleased that Anne chose to adopt that resolution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barkhausen. On incinerator technology?
I agree with Ann's position. I think she's stated it well. As a village board member in Lake Bluff, we adopted a new trash removal system that significantly increased our own recycling, and we've worked closely with the county's solid waste group, SWALCO it's called, and I look forward to being part of the effort to increase recycling as we've done here at home.
Okay, Mr. Mandel?
Yes, is my mic on? Yeah, there you go. I do not support incineration. I do support some waste to energy, anaerobic digestion, food composting, recycling. There's other ways of trying to reduce our waste and reduce our landfill use. I am a executive board, actually I'm the vice chairman of the executive board of SWALCO, Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, where I've also served as the chair of the finance committee and the legislative committee. We need to be proactive. We have a new recycling campaign throughout the county that we're promoting. Highland Park has led the way with pay-as-you-throw garbage payments, so you are incentivized to recycle. We have to do this more throughout the county, in the unincorporated county areas, but as far as incineration, I think we're just too urbanized an area to even deal with clean waste energy plants.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lambrecht?
I too am against incineration. I think that's unanimous here. I am a very big recycler and composter. I'm very glad that Highland Park finally did get on board and get these huge recycle bins. Before that, my excess was going over to Deerfield because we just did not have the containers. But it's really helped really reduce the amount of garbage we are ultimately producing. And I'm a huge composter, and I put it in my yard. I don't feel the need to give it to somebody else. My yard is nice and fruitful, and I like to keep my plants happy that way.
Okay, and the last person on this is Ms. Hickory.
I agree about the incineration as well. I think what is needed is a much more robust recycling program and curbside composting. I think this is an area where we need to do some really big consumer education to bring people on board. It takes a lot to change behaviors, and it takes a lot of getting in your face kind of approaches, and people in different towns and neighborhoods who get energized about the project teach each other and combine with programs at a grassroots level that then takes off and becomes a corporate behavior.
Okay, and we go to Ms. Hart first for this next question. Lake County is in the top 10 highest property taxed counties in the country. What could you do to help reduce that burden?
Well, rising property taxes are a major problem and it impacts families across Lake County. I worked in the assessor's office and I am a certified assessing official. I understand the property tax assessment and I know how frustrating it is. Home values go down and yet taxes still go up. We need to have transparency at all the different taxing bodies. People need to know and understand where their tax dollars are going, and it's the board members' responsibility, whether it be school board, library, park district, to make sure those dollars are spent wisely. Last year, the Park District, on which I serve, chose not to increase our tax levy, deciding instead to improve services and make up the difference in user fees. By operating better and focusing on the customer, we grew our revenue, and that will translate, not taking that CPI increase, will translate over 10 years of $1 million in savings to the taxpayer. And in the end, that's what really matters.
Okay, Mr. Barkhausen on property taxes?
Yeah, clearly, as one goes around running for any office these days, but particularly local government office, the concern about very high property taxes is at the top of everyone's mind. I mentioned at the outset, my own track record of dealing with taxes and spending issues as the chairman of the Finance Committee in Lake Bluff, where we achieved a AAA credit rating for the first time during a period of very steeply declining sales tax revenues, and working with a group of trustees in Shields Township that I helped to elect who have actually cut the township's property tax by 30%. We've experienced concerns recently in Lake Bluff about, and had very well-attended school board meetings, very concerned about a $15 million of reserves with our school district. So we have to look at all levels of local government to make sure that there's not excessive reliance on property taxes and to look to other sources of revenue.
Okay, Mr. Mandel?
Well, serving Highland Park on the city council for the past 19 years, I think we have kind of put some kind of models together on reducing tax burden. When the recession hit in 2008, we took our operating budget, we took it from about $60 million down to $50 million. You have to reduce costs, and you have to not raise taxes on people that are struggling. What we did in our government is, as I said when we started, was we took our levy and we lowered it 50%. We used to get 12.5% of your tax bill. Now we get 6.5. That just doesn't happen by saying okay to the staff. It's very aggressive management of a budget and looking for efficiencies. We have to work with other governments. We have to share services. We have to outsource to get lower prices, and we have to consolidate governments. I mean, it's simple. There has to be a new model in government that happens, or it's not going to get done. It's all lip service. And the state has to be a big player.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Lake County is in the top 10 highest property tax counties in the country. What could you do to help reduce that burden?
Yeah, it's I would, yeah, it is. I keep talking to people and they're very upset about it. One thing, I did talk about my experience that, I come from big company experience, and there was an issue that came to the board recently where, there was a diesel engine that needed excess ventilation for the diesel engine. And my question would have been, you don't put more dollars towards that. I don't have all the information. If that's a new install, you go back to the vendor. And, that's why I think my experience would be very good in this situation. But also synergies. What about throwing in the recorder of deeds office into the county clerk's office. It's already been done in 86 counties across this state, and it's been successful. We're not at the bleeding edge of technology. It works. You know, let's find ways to make things more efficient and reduce the bottom line, because people are not happy.
Okay, and Ms. Hickory on property taxes?
What was that again? Oh, same question.
It's really, what could you do to help reduce the property tax burden?
I think this goes to the issue of jobs, and of course, you know, the foreclosures and the reduced revenues because there are less people working. And part of that then looks at how to enhance what's available at the grassroots level. For instance, the whole area of sustainability and energy has to do with jobs. This is a whole big job market that's available, that's not really being pushed, explored, supported. And it translates into jobs, and it translates into jobs that would be local. That money would be local, and it would be double in effect because it would be right into the local economy.
Okay, and Ms. Maine on property tax burden?
Yes, thank you. Well, the Forest Preserve actually has decreased the levy in each of the past 4 years. The levy in the Forest Preserve has gone down 12% over the last 4 years. So we have really worked hard to decrease the tax burden on the residents. The Forest Preserve represents about 3% of your tax bill, and the county represents about 7% of your tax bill. At the county, we have 300 fewer employees. We've invested in energy savings. Last year, we saved $1.2 million alone in energy savings. We've really looked at how we restructure and reorganize government. One of the challenges that we have is that we try to make a budget and then the state takes away. If you were here before, they were talking about the PPRT. The state just took $1.2 million of inheritance tax out of our budget. The state has made other changes that come down to us. So we have a balanced budget, and then we're going to need to change it. In addition, there's increased pressures on the assessor's office as well as veteran services. So I'm committed to not increasing the levy at the county this year. Thank you.
Okay, this will be the last question before the closing statements, and it goes to Mr. Barkhausen first. Should we preserve more open space in Lake County? If so, how?
Well, more space will be preserved and should be preserved as a result of the bond issue that the taxpayers overwhelmingly supported in the 2008 general election for the Forest Preserve. And this is one of my great interests, and one of the reasons I'm running for the county board is as a result of a long-standing interest in traditional conservation issues. As a past member of the board of the Illinois Nature Conservancy, as a 12-year board member of Lake Forest Open Lands, as somebody who supports the Lake County's Forest Preserve Preservation Foundation. This is a great interest of mine, an area in which I have expertise, and would welcome the opportunity to work with the Forest Preserve District.
Okay. Next, Mr. Mandel.
Yes, I think we should continue to save open space. You know, a lot of the things I've done have been very environmentally minded, and how I started out in this business was in the late 80s, knocking on doors, getting an $80 million bond passed by the, at that time, Lake County board members. It was before tax cap, so I just had to get the people who didn't care about open space to pass it. But you know, I think with the limited amount of money that's left in the bonds and the future of slow growth, we have to come up with partnerships. You know, I worked with Senator Mark Kirk and Joyce O'Keefe on the Lake Shore Preserve on getting that thing done, and with the Forest Preserve District to some extent. And partnerships make it work. I worked with Forest Preserve on 38 acres on 22 and 41, where the Park District, Highland Park, the City of Highland Park, and the Forest Preserve and the state of Illinois put up money to save that land. So yes, I have and I will.
Thank you. Ms. Lambrecht?
I'm all for it. You know, we need to preserve our our county, well, our country, in, you know, keep the, you know, we cannot let every every inch be developed, and so I'm all for continuing in that way, and I'm very glad the county is doing that.
Okay. And Ms. Hickory?
I too believe that this is a valuable endeavor, and it serves as a natural container for preserving and conserving the land so that fragile areas are protected. It curbs that sprawl that we were talking about. And, you know, later if things change, you can always repurpose land. But, you know, the time is coming when water and other resources are going to become less sustainable, and the more protection we have out there, the better it'll be.
Okay. Ms. Maine?
Yes, thank you. Yesterday I was driving back from Wisconsin. I was driving down Route 45, and it was really exciting because all along Route 45 there were forest preserve signs, and there were signs saying, "This Dutch Gap bought with bond referendums from 2008. And I had the great privilege for 8 years to be the chair of the Land Acquisition Committee. It's got to be the best job anyone could ever have, certainly here in Lake County, where the residents support and understand the vitalness of our environment. So we've bought over 6,000 acres in the last 10 years. As Mr. Mandel said, the amount of money we have is decreasing. At the moment, with the economic climate, I don't see us going out for another bond referendum, but I think the partnerships that we have with Conserve Lake County, with open lands, working to create conservation easements that will protect the land, I think these are all great opportunities for us to continue to preserve the reason that so many of us moved here to Lake County, and that is its natural environment. So it's, I think the great thing is that the residents of Lake County understand the importance, and they've allowed the Forest Preserve to carry out their wishes.
Okay, and Ms. Hart, the last one.
Sure, I'm just going to clarify something from the last question, and I think it's important that we're as transparent as we can be. In the interest of transparency, the 30% tax cut for Shields Township was to the general fund of Shields, not including roads and bridges, and that equates to approximately half of 1% to the tax bill. I just don't want us thinking that somehow our tax bills are going to go down by 30%. So regarding the Forest Preserve, I am absolutely in favor of continuing to purchase land within the guidelines of the referendum that passed. The unfortunate part of the economic downturn is that land is less expensive right now, and so really this is the time to buy, and I think the Lake County Lake County Forest Preserves have made strategic purchases that will serve the residents of Lake County for generations.
Okay, now we go to closing statements, and I'll do District 21, then District 13, then District 11. So the first closing statement will be from Ms. Hickory.
This adage has never, oh my, can you hear me? This adage has been so true. Think globally, act locally. 47 million Americans are living on food stamps, 1 million a year file for bankruptcy because of medical bills, millions have lost or are losing their homes, and there's still the growing financial crisis of student loans awaiting us. From state to county to city, examples of privatizing resources such as water supply to compensate for revenue loss has resulted in increased costs, decrease in service, and compromised infrastructure in certain towns. Sand mining is taking place in Wisconsin, Minnesota, now southern Illinois, part of the fracking industry, bringing damage to land, water, and reduced revenue to local government. You see, resources are finite. The only resource that is not finite is our imagination, and that human work is what will get us out of this mess. I'm in favor of socially conscious and new economic models that bring a collaboration between government and citizens so that everybody is working towards our best end. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Maine, your closing statement.
Thank you. A lot of times it seems like the two E's predominate, economics and our environment, and that certainly encapsulates many of the issues here in Lake County. But I'd like to add a third E there, and that is energy. I think this is a job that requires a lot of time and it requires a lot of energy, and that's what I've given to the residents of my district for the last 10 years. It's more than just going to the committees that you're assigned to. It's going to extra meetings. It's serving on other committees. It's really understanding not only your district, but how your district fits in the greater area of Lake County and also in the Chicago area. So I've been passionate about these issues, and I continue to be passionate about these issues. This is something I care deeply about Lake County and what we've built on others and setting a good future. I bring a strong analytical approach to these issues. I mentioned that I have a doctorate in biochemistry, and I think what is good about that is, unlike at other levels of government, sometimes people get locked into a position. And if you're a good scientist, you look at what the outcome is, and you have to be willing to change, and you have to be willing to say, there's a better way, and it may not have been the way that I started with, but this is what the results are. And that's what I've tried to do in my district. I'm really proud that I secured safe drinking water for hundreds of my residents when they had radium in their water. I'm really happy about the strong infrastructure that we have for our roads, our water, and our sewer. We are not letting the infrastructure of Lake County deteriorate, and that's very important for our economic growth. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm really proud of the over 6,000 acres that we've been able to preserve in Lake County.
Thank you.
And I want to continue all of that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Barkhausen, your closing statement.
I think Commissioner Maine makes an important point in her closing statement about the importance of bringing a broad perspective to this position that we seek. And I mentioned at the outset my relevant experience in the legislature, on the village board, in the township, the fact that I have a familiarity with all of this broad and diverse district that we seek to represent, stretching from Lake Michigan all the way to Gages Lake and Route 45 in the middle of the county. I mentioned my track record of dealing decisively with financial issues, of achieving the AAA credit rating for Lake Bluff as chairman of the Finance Committee, of helping to cut the township's property tax. Yes, it may be a very small percentage of the total bill, but please point to me any other unit of local government that has done that, or the person who's been responsible for it. I mentioned my own longstanding interest in conservation and the role that we would have on the Forest Preserve District in continuing the county's commendable record of acquiring open space and developing it in such a wonderful way. And finally, I want to thank the League and the other sponsors for putting on this forum here today, but even in the time that we've had, we just can't cover it, all of it, and therefore I point to you again to my website, barkhausenforlakecounty.com, and the very specific detailed positions that I've spelled out for all of you who have greater interest in understanding what I stand for and what I will try to do.
Thank you. Ms. Hart, your closing statement.
I'd like to again thank the League of Women Voters and for all of you staying to attend the forum today. I'm running for Lake County Board because I care about the issues affecting our quality of life. Issues such as the loss of jobs and rising property taxes needs a hands-on, proactive approach to solving these problems. I will be a full-time representative for you. I have met many of you and knocked on your door, knocked on over 4,000 doors, speaking with you and your neighbors about what matters to us. You have given me your ideas, your thoughts, and your input. I have listened, and I will continue to listen as a member of the county board. I will push for solutions, and I will not stop until they're found. I am proud of the bipartisan support I have received from people who know that it's not about the party, but about the person and what they bring to the table. To that end, I'm the only candidate endorsed by elected officials from both parties. I'm honored to be endorsed by Democrat State Senator Susan Garrett and by Republican Sue Gravenhorst, our current county board representative. I've also been endorsed by the Sierra Club and the Lake County Farm Bureau and have the support of Republicans, Democrats, and independents across the district. You can visit my website, Hartford County Board, to read more about the issues. I look forward to representing Lake Bluff and the rest of the district, and I ask for your vote in the upcoming election. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mandel, your closing statement.
Okay, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, the Union League Club of Chicago, and the Patch for hosting this event and inviting us to share our thoughts. As a plan commissioner, as a councilman, as the mayor pro tem of Highland Park, as an executive board member of SWALCO, I have demonstrated my passion, could be a little excessive sometimes, but it's there, and success in representation of the citizens. This is all about being able to bring positive incomes for our communities and Lake County on behalf of our citizens. I've shown fiscal responsibility, environmental leadership, and a strong connection and communication to those that I represent. I have chaired many committees, worked in many neighborhoods, and know how to get results. I know how to get things done. To learn more about me, please go to stevemandel.com, where you can see my endorsements, which are many. They include the Sierra Club and the Lake County Farm Bureau, and many elected officials. They all support my election. Please vote early, October 22nd through November 3rd, and on Election Day, November 6th. Please support me and vote for me for Lake County Board District 11. I want to thank you very much for having me.
Okay. And Ms. Lambrecht, you have the last final closing statement.
Thank you for having me. Haven't been in public service, but per se, but I've always helped people with their issues. One of my friends, he's the CIO of Harris Bank in Highland Park, actually, and he talked to his leadership about me and how I handle, how I take ownership of problems and deliver the solutions. And he is across the aisle. He's a Democrat, but he's all about my candidacy. And I have my large company experience, which is huge. Infrastructure issues are major, and if we are not making good decisions and pushing back and saying, wait a minute, that's the vendor's issue, not additional, we're not going to put more money towards it. You need somebody that actually understands that that is the issue. So I'm fiscally very responsible, and I have a global, I have traveled a lot. I've spent a lot of time in East Europe. I know about, my focus is very global in nature, not so much just here, but it's good to know how other people live and know how we do not want to live. But I need your support in November, and I will do a good job, and hopefully.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the candidates for the Lake County Board: Mike Rummel, Laura Lambrecht, Steve Mandel, Sandra Hart, David Barkhausen, Ann Maine, and Arlene Hickory for participating. There are voters' guides for these candidates' debates on the League website, and I'd also like to thank Kathy O'Hara and Ben Davidson for all their help, and to the Lake Forest High School for the use of the auditorium. Thank you to the Patch, the Union League Club of Chicago, and the League of Women Voters of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, Highland Park-Highwood, and of Deerfield for co-sponsoring these debates. I'd also like to note that there's another candidates debate next Sunday, October 21st, 1:30 at Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Senior Center for the Lake County administrative positions of coroner, circuit court clerk, recorder, and state's attorney. I'd just like to remind you to remember to vote in the early voting period, October 22nd through November 3rd, or on Election Day, November 6th. And thank you all for attending and for staying for all three debates.